The suburban streets of Oak Ridge fell silent at midnight, save for the rhythmic footsteps of Michael Reeves as he paced the asphalt to outrun the ghosts in his mind. When retired Marine Corps sniper returns home, sometimes the battlefield follows. The complaints started small. Anonymous notes in his mailbox about suspicious nighttime activity and whispered concerns at the neighborhood association meeting, until Harrison Palmer from across the street confronted him directly on his front lawn, smartphone recording the entire exchange. What Palmer couldn't see through his camera lens was the invisible weight pressing down on Michael's chest, the phantom sounds of helicopter rotors that only sleep could amplify, or the doctor's orders to walk when the memories became too vivid. What Palmer couldn't possibly understand was that these midnight treks weren't a choice. They were survival. What happens when Michael finally reveals what he saw on his last mission that haunts him every night? Subscribe to our channel for more stories of misunderstood heroes fighting battles long after they've left the battlefield. 47 minutes. That's how long it took Michael Reeves to complete his route. Never 46, never 48. Precision mattered. Structure kept the chaos at bay. The digital clock on his nightstand read 2:17 a.m. when he laced up his tactical boots. Black Nikes would be less conspicuous, but they didn't provide the ankle support he needed if he had to move quickly. Old habits. Oak Ridge subdivision slept while Michael walked. His route never varied, left out of his driveway, 3 blocks north, 2 blocks east, 4 blocks south, 2 blocks west, then home. The neighborhood's gentle curves and cul-de-sacs created natural choke points. Identifying them was automatic, like breathing. He noted the Johnsons' new lawn ornament, the Patel's guest room light burning at unusual hours, the Hendersons' teenager sneaking back in through a basement window. Michael cataloged changes. Changes could be threats. His breath formed small clouds in the autumn air. Halfway through his route, the memories surfaced. They always did. The rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors, radio static punctuated by urgent voices, the weight of his rifle against his shoulder. Whiskey 6, this is Echo 3. Target verified. Awaiting green light. Michael blinked hard. The voice in his head belonged to a man 3 years dead. He rounded the final corner of his route, his home now visible at the end of the street. Something new caught his eye. A small black dome mounted under Harrison Palmer's eaves. Security camera, brand new, pointed directly at Michael's front yard. Palmer had moved in 6 months ago. Retired accountant. Neighborhood association treasurer. Self-appointed guardian of property values. He'd made his distaste for Michael clear from day one, without a single direct conversation. Michael's mailbox hung slightly open. Inside lay a folded piece of paper. No stamp, no envelope. He unfolded it under the yellow glow of his porch light. Some of us have to work in the morning. Your prowling needs to stop. The handwriting was precise. Blocky capital letters. Michael refolded the note along its original crease and slipped it into his pocket. Behind him, Palmer's porch light flickered on. Daylight was harder than darkness. Michael moved through his morning routine with military precision. Bed made with hospital corners. Breakfast measured to the gram. Pills arranged in their compartments but left untaken. The VA doctor insisted they would help. Michael knew better. They dulled his senses, created a fog he couldn't afford. His living room wall bore a topographic map of the subdivision. Red pins marked security cameras. Blue pins tracked neighborhood watch patrols. Yellow pins identified houses with irregular schedules that might mask unusual activity. Most people saw paranoia. Michael saw preparation. The phone rang at exactly 10:07 a.m. Michael? Dr. Winters here. You missed our appointment yesterday. He hadn't forgotten. He'd chosen not to go. Something came up, he said. Your neighbor again? Michael said nothing. The silence stretched. The walks are therapeutic, Michael, but you need more than that. The medication makes me vulnerable. It helps manage the hypervigilance. The flashbacks. Michael watched through his blinds as Palmer retrieved his mail, glancing toward Michael's house. I'm managing. Your sleep patterns suggest otherwise. I sleep enough. 2 hours a night isn't enough, not long term. Michael ended the call with a promise to reschedule that both knew he wouldn't keep. The rest of the day passed in isolation. He disassembled and cleaned his service pistol, an illegal comfort he kept locked in a biometric safe. He checked the home security system twice. He avoided windows during daylight hours. At dusk, he forced himself to retrieve the mail. Bills, VA correspondence, A postcard from Rodriguez, former teammate, now stationed at Fort Benning. The picture showed Georgia pines against a sunset. The message was short: "Breathe, brother, one day at a time." Palmer was watching from across the street, pretending to adjust his sprinkler system. Michael felt the stare between his shoulder blades, his muscles tensed, combat instincts calculating distance, cover, response time. Not here. Not now. He shut his front door and leaned against it, breathing deliberately until his heart rate normalized. When night fell, the flashbacks came right on schedule. More vivid than usual. The helicopter, the radio, the compound below them, dark except for a single light. The squad moving into position. His spotter's voice in his ear. The unexpected movement in his scope. The decision made in milliseconds. The aftermath. Michael gasped awake, sheets soaked with sweat. The clock read 1:58 a.m., time to walk. 3 days of notes, each more aggressive than the last. Your midnight prowling is being documented. Security footage has been shared with authorities. This neighborhood has no place for your kind. Michael planted marigolds along his front walkway, the repetitive motion of digging small holes and patting soil grounding him in the present. The garden was new. His therapist's suggestion. "Create something living," she'd said. "Watch it grow." He sensed the approach before he heard it. Footsteps, deliberate and heavy. The slight rustle of polyester pants. A phone's camera shutter. Sound, poorly disguised by a cough. "Mr. Reeves." Michael didn't look up. "Mr. Palmer. That's what neighbors do, isn't it? Learn each other's names?" Palmer's voice carried the practiced confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Even the neighbors who prefer the cover of darkness." Michael continued planting. 1 marigold, 2 inches of space, another marigold. "I'm filming this interaction for my protection," Palmer announced, holding his smartphone at eye level, "given your background and behavior." Now Michael looked up. Palmer stood on the sidewalk, carefully not trespassing, in pressed khakis and a golf shirt with the Neighborhood Association logo. His silver hair was immaculately coiffed. His face bore the ruddy complexion of controlled outrage. "Is there something you need?" Michael asked. "I need you to explain why a grown man prowls around a family neighborhood at 3 in the morning." Michael noticed the curtains twitching in houses across the street. Audience gathered. "Showtime. I walk," Michael said. "Doctor's orders." Palmer's laugh was theatrical. "At 3 a.m.? Do you take us for fools? I've reviewed my security footage. You follow the same route. You observe houses. You pause at certain vantage points." He stepped closer. "You case the neighborhood like a common thief." Michael's hands stilled in the soil. His heartbeat accelerated. Familiar pressure built behind his eyes, the prelude to memories better left buried. "I was a Force Recon Marine," he said quietly. "If I wanted to enter your home, Mr. Palmer, you wouldn't know until I was standing over your bed." Palmer's face flushed deeper. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact. This is exactly what I'm talking about." Palmer turned to address his phone camera now. "Threatening a homeowner who simply asks why he's lurking around at night. This is all being documented for the authorities." Neighbors had emerged onto porches now. The Hendersons, the Chens, Mrs. Abernathy from the corner house, all watching, all judging. "I have PTSD," Michael said, his voice still level. "My doctor recommends walking when sleep is difficult." Palmer scoffed. "The veteran card, how convenient." He lowered his voice, though still loud enough for nearby neighbors to hear. "Listen to me very carefully. I've dealt with people like you before. People who think the rules don't apply to them. People who bring down property values and community standards." Michael stood slowly, brushing soil from his hands. 6'2" to Palmer's 5'9". 190 pounds of muscle to Palmer's soft middle. The disparity wasn't lost on either man. "We're done here," Michael said. "We're done when I say we're done," Palmer hissed. "The association meets next Tuesday. 7 p.m., Community Center. Your nocturnal activities are on the agenda. I suggest you attend if you want any say in the outcome." Michael said nothing. His hands had stopped trembling, replaced by a dangerous stillness that anyone who'd served with him would have recognized as a warning. Palmer mistook it for intimidation. He smiled, victorious. "That's what I thought. All you military types, tough until someone stands up to you." He waved his phone. "I've got you documented. Every circuit of the neighborhood, every suspicious pause, Every home you've observed. Michael turned and walked to his front door, each step measured. "This isn't over, Reeves," Palmer called after him. "People have a right to feel safe in their homes." The door closed behind Michael with a soft click. Inside, he pressed his forehead against the cool wood, eyes closed, breath coming in controlled measures. In, hold. Out, hold. His hands shook now, not from fear, but from the effort of containment. The part of him trained to neutralize threats had calcified that impulse, offering only one solution. In, hold, out, hold. He opened his eyes. On the hallway table sat his medicine, the little orange bottle of tranquilizers he'd refused to take, the ones that would dull the hypervigilance, the ones that would make him vulnerable. Michael walked past them to the kitchen. He filled a glass with water and drank it slowly, staring out the window at Palmer, who was now showing his phone to Mrs. Chen, gesturing animatedly toward Michael's house. The official letter arrived the next morning, crisp white envelope with the Oak Ridge Neighborhood Association letterhead. Inside, a formal request for his attendance at Tuesday's meeting to address community concerns regarding unusual nocturnal activities. Michael placed it in the drawer with the others, Palmer's notes, the association's previous friendly reminders about lawn maintenance standards and trash can placement. Evidence, cataloged and preserved. Old habits. The meeting was in 4 days. Michael hadn't been in a room with that many civilians since his discharge processing. The thought alone made his chest tighten. His phone buzzed. Text from Rodriguez. "Checking in, brother. Update?" Michael stared at the screen. What could he say? That he was being hunted in the very place he'd come to heal? That his new enemy carried a smartphone instead of a rifle? He typed simply, "Still here." Rodriguez would understand. The Oak Ridge Community Center had once been a church. Vaulted ceilings, wooden pews repurposed as benches, stained glass windows covered by blinds. Michael arrived 20 minutes early, enough time to survey the room, identify exits, position himself strategically. He chose a seat in the back corner, back to the wall. Clear sightlines to both doors, minimal exposure. People filtered in slowly. Some he recognized from his neighborhood walks. Others he knew only as shapes behind curtains. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing his way when they thought he wasn't watching. He was always watching. Harrison Palmer arrived last, flanked by 2 association board members. He carried a leather portfolio and a tablet. The confidence in his stride suggested a man who had already won. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin." Palmer took his position at the front, a commandant addressing his troops. "We have several items on tonight's agenda, but I'd like to start with our most pressing community concern." His eyes found Michael in the corner. "Mr. Reeves, would you come forward, please?" Michael didn't move. Palmer's smile tightened. "Very well. For those who don't know, Mr. Reeves is a relatively new resident of Oak Ridge. And while we welcome all new neighbors, certain behaviors have raised significant security concerns." He tapped. His tablet and the projection screen behind him illuminated with grainy night vision footage. Michael walking past Palmer's house. Michael pausing at the corner of Maple and Elm. Michael noting something in what appeared to be a small notebook. "These clips were captured over the past month," Palmer continued. "Mr. Reeves conducts these patrols almost nightly, between approximately 2 and 3 a.m. The pattern suggests surveillance, preparation." Murmurs rippled through the room. Palmer let them build before continuing. When confronted about these activities, Mr. Reeves became aggressive, threatening even. He played a carefully edited clip of their confrontation, ending with Michael's statement about standing over Palmer's bed. More murmurs, louder now. "The safety of our community must be our paramount concern," Palmer said, his voice grave. "I propose we establish a neighborhood watch program specifically focused on monitoring suspicious nighttime activities. I already have 7 volunteers." A woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. "Is that legal? Targeting one resident?" "We're not targeting anyone," Palmer replied smoothly. "We're securing our neighborhood against potential threats." "And what exactly is the threat?" The question came from the back of the room. An elderly woman with silver hair and piercing eyes. "A man walking at night?" Palmer's smile remained fixed. "Mrs. Lancaster, while we appreciate your input, there are aspects to this situation that I'd like to hear from Mr. Reeves," she interrupted. "If we're discussing him, He should have the opportunity to speak. All eyes turned to Michael. Sudden attention sent a surge of adrenaline through his system. Combat instinct urged him to retreat, to find cover. He forced himself to remain seated. "Mr. Reeves?" Palmer prompted, clearly expecting refusal. Michael stood slowly. The room fell silent. He walked to the center aisle but went no further. "I served 8 years as a Force Reconnaissance Marine," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the hushed room. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in classified locations." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I was honorably discharged last year. I have post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury from an IED, both diagnosed by VA doctors." The room remained silent, faces a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. "I walk at night because I can't sleep. The doctors recommend it as an alternative to increasing my medication. I follow the same route because routine helps with the symptoms. I take notes because—" he hesitated, "because documenting my environment helps me separate what's real from what isn't." He met Palmer's gaze directly. "I'm not a threat to this community." Palmer recovered quickly. "While we appreciate your service, Mr. Reeves, you must understand how your behavior appears to ordinary citizens. Prowling at night, documenting our homes. My husband had nightmares for 20 years after Vietnam." All heads turned toward Mrs. Lancaster, who had risen from her seat. "Eleanor," Palmer began, "this isn't—" "He walked," she continued, ignoring him. "Every night, around our neighborhood in Charleston. The neighbors understood. They looked out. For him, not because they feared him, but because they respected what he'd sacrificed." Her eyes found Michael's. Recognition. Understanding. "If Mr. Reeves says he walks for medical reasons, I believe him. And I think this community should be supporting our veterans, not criminalizing them." A few heads nodded. Others looked uncertain. Palmer sensed the shift and moved quickly to regain control. "No one is criminalizing anyone," he said. "But good intentions don't guarantee safety. I propose we put it to a vote. All in favor of establishing a neighborhood watch program with particular attention to unusual nighttime activities, please raise your hands." Hands went up. More than Michael expected. Perhaps 15 out of the 40 people present. Those opposed? Fewer hands. Perhaps 10, including Mrs. Lancaster's. Abstentions. The remainder raised their hands, unwilling to commit either way. Palmer smiled. "The motion carries. We'll begin organizing immediately. Mr. Chen has graciously volunteered to coordinate scheduling. If anyone else wishes to participate, please see him after the meeting." He turned to the next agenda item, effectively dismissing Michael's presence. The message was clear. "You've been dealt with." Michael returned to his seat. The remainder of the meeting passed in a blur of property maintenance discussions and upcoming social events. He focused on controlling his breathing, on staying present. When the meeting adjourned, he moved quickly toward the exit, avoiding eye contact. A hand touched his arm gently. "Mrs. Lancaster, Eleanor Lancaster," she said. "My Frank and I moved here 5 years ago. He passed last spring. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am." "Thank you." She studied his face. "That man is a bully. Has been since he moved in. Always needs someone to target." Michael said nothing. "Frank used to bake when the memories got bad," she continued. "Said kneading dough gave his hands something better to do than shake." Her eyes were kind but shrewd. "Come by tomorrow, 247 Oakwood Drive, the blue house with the rose trellis. I make a decent cup of coffee." Before Michael could respond, she patted his arm and walked away, her back straight, despite her years. Outside, the night air cooled his face. Palmer and his newly appointed watch captains huddled beneath a streetlight, casting occasional glances his way, documenting, monitoring. Michael walked home alone, hyper-aware of the eyes following him. Michael didn't sleep that night, or the next. His walking route now felt compromised, a patrol zone where he was both observer and observed. Palmer's neighborhood watch had mobilized immediately, with cars parked strategically along Michael's usual path, volunteers pretending to check mail or walk dogs at 2 a.m. By the third day, exhaustion had settled into his bones. The lack of sleep amplified his symptoms: jumpy reflexes, difficulty concentrating, heightened sensitivity to sound. He stood at his kitchen window, staring at the house across the street where Palmer had installed yet another camera. This one pointed directly at Michael's front door. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Michael approached the door cautiously, checking the security camera feed on his phone before opening it. Eleanor Lancaster stood on his porch, holding a cloth-covered basket. "You didn't come by yesterday," she said without preamble. "So I brought the coffee to you, and sourdough, Frank's recipe." Michael hesitated, then stepped back to let her in. His home wasn't set up for visitors. Maps on walls, security monitors, sparse, functional furniture. Nothing that suggested comfort or permanence. If Eleanor noticed the abnormality, she didn't comment. She moved to the kitchen with the confidence of a woman who had spent decades making herself at home wherever she went. "Mugs?" she asked. Michael pointed to a cabinet. She set about preparing coffee like she'd done it 1,000 times in this very kitchen. 8 years, you said. Force Recon? Yes, ma'am. Frank was Army, 1st Cavalry Division, 2 tours in Vietnam. She placed a steaming mug before him. Sugar? No, thank you. Eleanor sat across from him, her bright eyes assessing. "Tell me about yourself, Michael Reeves." The directness was refreshing after months of sidelong glances and whispered judgments. "Not much to tell." "I doubt that." She sipped her coffee. "Start with before. Who were you before the Marines?" "Michael." Hadn't thought about before in a long time. "Oklahoma, small town. Parents died when I was in high school. Car accident. Enlisted at 18. Family now?" "None." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "The war came home with you." It wasn't a question. Michael stared into his coffee. "Parts of it. Frank used to say he left his best self in the jungle. Took him 20 years to find it again." She broke off a piece of bread and placed it before Michael. "Eat. You look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't." "Because of Palmer's watchdogs?" Michael nodded. "They're on my route now, watching, recording. Bunch of retirees playing spy games," Eleanor scoffed. "As if they have anything better to do than harass a veteran." "It's working," Michael admitted. "I can't walk without being followed. Can't sleep without walking." "What did your last mission involve?" she asked suddenly. Michael stiffened. "Classified? Of course it is." Eleanor's expression softened. "But it follows you. Especially at night. The helicopter rotors. The radio static. The weight of the decision." "Yes." "Have you talked to anyone?" "About it." "Someone who understands?" "My old team is scattered. 2 dead, 1 in Germany. Rodriguez is at Fort Benning. Taylor's still deployed." Michael realized he was sharing more than he had with anyone since his discharge. Something about Eleanor reminded him of the battalion chaplain. Non-judgmental, patient, impossible to bullshit. "My son is the police chief here," she said casually. "David, good man, 20 years on the force." Michael said nothing, but his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "Palmer's made complaints to the police," Eleanor continued. 3 so far. David has filed them appropriately. Meaning he recognizes harassment when he sees it. She leaned forward. "David suggested I tell you that if Palmer's surveillance crosses into stalking, there are legal remedies. I don't want trouble. Seems to me trouble found you regardless." Eleanor placed her empty mug in the sink. "David would be happy to meet with you." "Unofficially." Michael shook his head. "The last thing I need is police involvement. Even if it helps." "Especially then." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. "You're not just dealing with PTSD, are you? There's something specific about that last mission." The room felt suddenly airless. Michael stood, moving to the window. Across the street, Palmer was retrieving his mail, his gaze fixed on Michael's. "House, thank you for the bread," Michael said. "And the coffee." Eleanor recognized the dismissal, but didn't take offense. She gathered her basket and moved to the door. "Palmer's installing more cameras tomorrow. 3 of them, along your usual route. Just so you know." Michael turned. "How do you know that?" A small smile crossed Eleanor's face. "I was neighborhood watch coordinator before Palmer arrived. Still, have friends in useful places." She paused at the door. "My offer stands. Coffee, conversation, or just a place where no cameras can see you. Anytime." After she left, Michael stood motionless in his living room, Eleanor's bread untouched on the counter. For the first time in months, someone had entered his space without triggering his defenses, without judging, without fear. He checked his phone. 3 missed calls from his VA therapist. 1 text from Rodriguez. "Nightmares worse? Call me." Outside, Palmer was installing something on his mailbox post. Another camera, smaller than the others. Focused on Michael's driveway, Michael made a decision. He dialed Rodriguez's number. "Brother," Rodriguez answered immediately. "Been worried about you. I need advice," Michael said. Civilian situation. Getting complicated. Talk to me. Michael explained everything. The walks, Palmer's escalating harassment, the neighborhood watch now monitoring his movements, the cameras documenting his every step outside his home. This guy sounds like a Class A asshole, Rodriguez said when Michael finished. But not dangerous? Not physically. Michael searched for the right description. He's like that commander in Helmand, the one who kept pushing for higher body counts to pad his record. Ambitious, self-righteous, willing to sacrifice others. Yeah. You have options, Rodriguez said. Legal ones. I just want to be left alone. Not gonna happen with this guy. He's marked you as a target. Rodriguez paused. Look, I've got leave coming up. Taylor, too. We could come out there, show some force. No, Michael said quickly. That would escalate things. Sometimes a show of force prevents a fight. Not this time. Michael watched as Palmer photographed his house from across the street, not even pretending to be discreet anymore. This isn't a battlefield. All ground is battlefield when someone's hunting you, brother. Rodriguez's voice softened. What? About that lady you mentioned? The older one with the cop son? Eleanor. Yeah, sounds like she's offering real help. You should take it. Michael was silent for a long moment. I'll think about it. Do more than think. And call your damn therapist back. Rodriguez's tone was firm, but concerned. This is exactly the kind of stress that makes your symptoms worse. After hanging up, Michael stared at Eleanor's phone number, which she had written on a napkin beside the bread. Outside, Palmer was speaking to another neighbor, pointing repeatedly at Michael's house. The walls felt like they were closing in. The safe haven he had created for himself was becoming a prison. Michael picked up his phone again and dialed Eleanor's number. I'd like to meet your son, he said when she answered. Unofficially, the night walk had become a gauntlet. Michael stepped from his front door at 2:17 a.m., precisely on schedule despite knowing what awaited him. His route, once a private ritual of survival, was now a public performance with an unwanted audience. 3. Houses down, a sedan idled at the curb, interior lights dimmed but not dark. The Chen family's teenage son, recruited into Palmer's watch program with promises of college application credentials, slouched behind the wheel, phone held at ready. Michael kept walking. At the corner of Oak Ridge and Maple, Mrs. Henderson sat on her porch swing, a novel in her lap that she wasn't reading. Her husband's hunting binoculars rested beside her. Michael nodded politely. She looked away. The surveillance was clumsy but effective. Each observer tracked his progress, some documenting. With phones, others simply watching. Palmer had positioned his chess pieces strategically around the neighborhood, ensuring Michael was visible to at least one pair of eyes at all times. When Michael reached the halfway point of his route, the small park with its wooden gazebo, he found Palmer himself waiting, leaning against his BMW, arms crossed in satisfaction. Beautiful night for a stroll, Palmer called out. Or is it reconnaissance? Michael continued walking, maintaining his pace. Palmer fell into step beside him. The neighbors are curious. What exactly are you looking for during these walks? Peace and quiet. Palmer laughed. Interesting choice of words from a man who won't reveal what he did in the military. Classified, you said. What does that cover, I wonder? What exactly are you hiding, Mr. Reeves? Michael kept his gaze forward. Don't engage. Complete the route. Return to base. The association has authorized expanding our security measures, Palmer continued. Motion-activated lights, additional cameras, a direct line to the police department. Still, Michael said nothing. Nothing to say, not surprising. Men like you, hiding behind service and PTSD when it's convenient. Michael stopped abruptly. Palmer nearly stumbled, continuing forward, then turned back with a triumphant smile. He'd gotten a reaction. You don't know me, Michael said. Quietly. I know your type. Palmer stepped closer, emboldened by Michael's break in composure. Using your veteran status as a shield, playing on people's sympathy while you case their homes. I'm going to continue my walk now, by all means. Palmer gestured ahead with exaggerated courtesy. Just know that we're watching. Every single night. Michael resumed walking, his breathing carefully controlled. Behind him, Palmer spoke into a phone. Subject continuing east on Maple. Henderson has visual. The rest of the route passed in a blur of shadowed observers and the weight of unseen cameras. When Michael finally reached his driveway, exhaustion pressed down on him. Not just physical, but a bone-deep weariness of being perpetually hunted. He was unlocking his front door when white light exploded around him, blinding, disorienting, accompanied by a high-pitched electronic whine. The world fractured. He was back in the helicopter. Searchlights sweeping the compound below. Radio chatter urgent in his ear. The target house illuminated in stark white light. Movement at the southeast corner. Contact. Southeast corner, his spotter called. The figure emerged from shadows. Weapon. Raised. Small. Too small. Michael's finger hesitated on the trigger for a fraction of a second. The explosion from below rocked the helicopter. The cabin filled with smoke and screams. His spotter, half his face gone, still pointed toward the target. Michael! The voice cut through the memory. Female. Elderly. Concerned. Eleanor stood on his driveway, her hand on his arm. Behind her, Palmer's house blazed with security lights. Commercial-grade LEDs pointed directly at Michael's property. Michael, you're safe. You're in Oak Ridge. He became aware that he was crouched behind his car, back pressed against the tire, hands positioned, as if holding a rifle that wasn't there. Flashback, he managed. Eleanor nodded, understanding without needing details. Let's get you inside. Across the street, Palmer stood in his doorway, phone held up, recording everything. Deliberate, Eleanor said, her voice tight with controlled anger. She sat at Michael's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Those lights are designed to disorient. Palmer had them installed this morning. Michael stared at his own mug, untouched. The flashback had left him drained, his hands still trembling slightly. How do you know? Mrs. Chen. Her husband's on. The association board. Palmer presented it as security lighting, but specified the placement directly facing your property. Eleanor's eyes were sharp with indignation. This isn't neighborhood watch anymore. It's harassment. Michael said nothing. The flashback had been the worst in months. Vivid, complete, utterly disorienting. He'd lost time, lost awareness of his surroundings, become vulnerable. You need to document this, Eleanor continued. All of it. The lights, the surveillance, the confrontations. Why? For when we go to David. Michael shook his head. I told you. I don't want police involvement. This isn't just about what you want anymore. Eleanor's voice softened. Michael, he triggered a severe episode. Deliberately. That crosses a line. Before Michael could respond, red and blue lights flashed through the windows. A police cruiser pulled up in front of the house, lights spinning but no siren. What now? Eleanor muttered, moving to the window. Two officers approached the front door. One younger, hand resting near his holster. The other older, more cautious in his movements. The doorbell rang. Michael stood, forcing his breathing to remain steady. I'll handle this. I'm staying right here, Eleanor said firmly. Michael opened the door. The younger officer tensed visibly. The older one stepped forward. Mr. Reeves? Officer Davis? This is Officer Collins. We received a call about a disturbance. Possibly an armed individual in the front yard. Michael's jaw tightened. There was no weapon. Sir, we need to verify that, Officer Collins said. The caller was quite specific about seeing you in a combat stance. PTSD episode, Eleanor said, appearing behind Michael. Triggered by those new floodlights Mr. Palmer installed today. The ones pointing directly at this property. Officer Davis's expression shifted subtly. Mrs. Lancaster, didn't expect to see you here. Checking on my friend after Harrison Palmer deliberately triggered a veteran's PTSD with military-grade disorientation lights. Her voice was steel wrapped in southern politeness. Perhaps you should be investigating that instead. Davis looked between them. Mr. Reeves, can you confirm you don't have any weapons on the property? I have no illegal weapons, Michael said carefully. The officer nodded, understanding the distinction. Mind if we come in briefly, just to complete our report? Michael stepped aside. The officers entered, conducted a cursory visual inspection, and found nothing of concern. As they prepared to leave, Davis handed Michael his card. If there are further incidents, call this number directly, he said quietly. My personal cell. Might save some time. After they left, Eleanor watched through the window as the officers stopped at Palmer's house. Davis is good people. His father was Army. 2. Palmer called the police, Michael said flatly. Claimed I was armed. Of course he did. Eleanor turned to face him. This will escalate, Michael. Men like Palmer don't stop until they win or are stopped. Michael knew she was right. He'd seen it before. Not just in war zones, but in training, in barracks, in human nature itself. Some people needed enemies to feel powerful. I should have stayed away from populated areas, he said. Found somewhere isolated. And let men like Palmer dictate where veterans can live? Eleanor shook her head. No, that's not the answer. But as Michael watched Palmer gesturing dramatically to the officers, playing the concerned citizen to perfection, he wondered if this was a battle he had the strength to fight. The VA medical center smelled like every military hospital Michael had ever been in. Antiseptic over institutional paint, with undertones of cafeteria food and industrial cleaning supplies. He sat in the waiting room, surrounded by men and women whose bodies and minds bore the invisible wounds of service. Some he recognized from group therapy sessions he'd attended briefly before deciding they weren't for him. A few nodded in acknowledgement. Most kept to themselves, eyes fixed on phones or the muted television broadcasting a home renovation show. Reeves? A nurse appeared in the doorway. Dr. Winters will see you now. Dr. Amara Winters had been Michael's assigned psychiatrist since his discharge, early 40s, with close-cropped hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd served 2 tours as a military psychiatrist in Afghanistan before joining the VA. Michael respected her because she never pretended to understand exactly what he'd experienced, but she understood enough. You rescheduled, she said as he took a seat in her office. That's progress. Didn't have much choice. Dr. Winters reviewed her tablet. Your sleep stats from the monitoring app are concerning. Multiple nights with less than 2 hours. Elevated heart rate during periods you are asleep. She looked up. The walking isn't helping anymore. The walking is complicated now. Michael explained the situation with Palmer, the neighborhood. Watch, the surveillance, the floodlights, and the police call. Dr. Winters listened without interruption, taking occasional notes. This is exactly the kind of environmental stressor that can exacerbate PTSD symptoms, she said when he finished. Particularly the sense of being watched, monitored, unsafe in your own space. I need better strategies, Michael said. The current ones aren't working. The medication would help. The one you've been refusing. Michael shook his head. It dulls everything. Makes it hard to stay alert. That's partly the point, Michael. Your hypervigilance isn't protecting you. It's exhausting you. She leaned forward. The propranolol helps block the physical symptoms of anxiety. The prazosin specifically targets nightmares. Combined with the talk therapy, they create a treatment protocol with proven effectiveness. I've tried them. They make me vulnerable. Vulnerable how? Michael struggled to articulate it. Slower reactions, dulled senses, reduced awareness. You're not in a combat zone anymore, aren't I? The words came out sharper than he intended. My home is under surveillance. My movements are monitored. I'm being intentionally triggered by someone trying to provoke a reaction. Dr. Winters considered this. Tell me about the flashback after the floodlights. Michael's jaw tightened. Same one as always. The helicopter. The compound. Yes, you never fully described what happened that night. Michael stared at the diplomas on her wall, focusing on the textured paper, the formal signatures, classified. The mission details are classified. Your experience of it isn't. Not in this room. The silence stretched between them. Dr. Winters waited, patient as always. We were extracting a high-value target, Michael finally said, his voice flat. Intelligence said he was alone. They were wrong. The helicopter, the night vision, the compound below. There was movement at the perimeter. A figure with what looked like a weapon. Michael's hands tightened on the chair arms. Small. Too small to be an adult. Dr. Winters said nothing, giving him space to continue. I hesitated. Half a second, then the RPG hit. Michael closed his eyes briefly. 3 teammates died. 2 more wounded. The target escaped, and you blame yourself. I made a choice. The wrong one. You saw a child and hesitated. That's human, Michael. It's a failure. As a soldier. As a spotter. The bitterness in his voice was directed entirely inward. Half a second of hesitation cost 3 lives. Dr. Winters let the statement hang in the air, neither confirming nor denying its truth. The nightmares always end the same way. Michael continued. I make a different choice. I take the shot, and then I see the child's face as they fall. No good options, Dr. Winters observed. Only impossible ones. That's not an excuse. No, it's reality. Moral injury often accompanies PTSD, especially from combat. The trauma isn't just what happened to you. It's what you had to do, or couldn't do. She made a note in her tablet. These neighborhood confrontations are reopening that wound. Michael hadn't considered the connection, but it made sense. Palmer's surveillance, the constant monitoring, the pressure to react, it all echoed the impossible choices of that night. "I'm going to write you a letter," Dr. Winters said, "medically documenting your PTSD and your treatment plan, including the night walks as prescribed therapy. You can use it with the neighborhood association or police if needed. I don't want my condition made public. Your health information remains private, but having documentation may help prevent further escalation." She paused. "I'm also going to strongly recommend a medical leave from your remote work. Your current stress levels are unsustainable." Michael started to protest, but she held up a hand. "This isn't optional, Michael. Your latest brain scans show increased inflammation in areas already damaged by the IED blast. Sleep deprivation exacerbates TBI symptoms. Combined with untreated PTSD, we're looking at potential long-term cognitive impacts." The clinical assessment landed like a physical blow. Michael had been so focused on surviving each day that he hadn't considered the cumulative damage. "You have two choices," Dr. Winters continued. "Begin the full treatment protocol, medication, regular therapy, stress reduction, or we discuss inpatient care. Hospitalization, if necessary, yes." Michael stood, moving to the window that overlooked the parking lot. Veterans of various ages made their way in and out of the facility, some with visible injuries, others with wounds carried inside. "I'm not the only one struggling," he said quietly. "No, but right now, we're talking about you." Dr. Winters' voice softened slightly. "This isn't weakness, Michael. It's brain chemistry and neurological response. Your body and mind experience trauma, and they're still responding to perceived threats." Michael thought about his quiet house, now a fortress under siege, about Palmer's cameras tracking his movements, about the flashbacks that transported him back to the worst night of his life. "The medications," he said finally. "What's the adjustment period?" 2 to 3 weeks for full effect. Side effects are strongest in the first week. And during that time, you'll need support. Is there someone who can check in on you regularly? Eleanor's face came to mind, and behind it, the memory of Rodriguez's offer. "Taylor and I could come out there." "Maybe," Michael said. "I need to make some calls." Dr. Winters nodded, understanding the significance of this small concession. "I'll write the prescriptions. And Michael," she met his gaze directly, "this neighborhood situation, don't handle it alone." As Michael left the VA hospital, prescriptions in hand, he checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Eleanor. 1 text message. Palmer called. "Emergency HOA meeting, tomorrow night. Subject, security threat removal procedures. Call me." In the parking lot, Michael sat in his truck for a long time, staring at the medications in their white paper bag. The choice felt like surrender, like admitting defeat. His phone rang. "Rodriguez." "Brother," Michael answered. "You sound like shit." Rodriguez replied. "Decision time. Taylor got leave approved. We can be there by tomorrow afternoon." Michael watched an older veteran struggle to lift his wheelchair into his car. A younger hospital volunteer hurried over to help. "Yeah," Michael said finally. "I think that's a good idea." Michael recognized the sound before the vehicle came into view. The distinctive rumble of a modified F-150, exhaust system altered to a particular specification. Rodriguez had always insisted it improve performance. Taylor claimed it was just so Rodriguez could hear himself coming. The truck pulled into Michael's driveway at precisely 14:37 hours, 3 minutes ahead of their estimated arrival time. Military punctuality. Some habits never died. Michael stood on his porch, watching as 2 men emerged from the vehicle. Rodriguez first, compact, muscular, with a neatly trimmed beard, and the easy confidence of someone comfortable in any environment. Then Taylor, taller, leaner, his movements economical and precise, eyes constantly scanning. For a moment they simply looked at each other, these men who had once trusted each other with their lives. Then Rodriguez broke into a grin. "You look like shit, Reeves. You look fat, Rodriguez." Tactical patting. They embraced briefly, the gruff affection of men who had seen each other at their best and worst. Taylor stepped forward next, clasping Michael's hand firmly. Good to see you upright, Taylor said. Likewise. Michael nodded toward the house. Come in. Neighbors are watching. Inside, Rodriguez whistled softly at the security setup. The monitors showing camera feeds, the reinforced doors, the mapped neighborhood on the wall. Nice fob you've got here, he said, using the military term for forward operating base. Taylor moved to the map, studying the pins. Red is surveillance, cameras. Michael confirmed. Blue is neighborhood watch positions. Yellow is houses with irregular patterns. And green? Taylor pointed to several green pins clustered in one area. Potential allies. People who haven't joined Palmer's crusade. Rodriguez dropped his duffel bag and turned a slow circle, taking in the sparse furnishings, the tactical positioning of everything, the clear sight lines to all entry points. How long have you been living like this? He asked quietly. Michael didn't answer directly. Coffee? Beer? Beer, Rodriguez said. Coffee, Taylor countered. We need to talk strategy with clear heads. In the kitchen, Michael felt a strange dissonance. These men who belonged to his past life now standing in his present one. It should have felt like an invasion. Instead, it felt like reinforcements arriving after a long siege. Eleanor called, Michael said, setting mugs on the counter. Palmer's accelerated his timeline. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. The old lady you mentioned? Rodriguez accepted the coffee. The one with the cop son? She's been keeping tabs on Palmer's movements. Says he's pushing for some kind of emergency eviction procedure. Taylor frowned. On what grounds? Public safety threat. Unstable veteran. Take your pick. Michael leaned against the counter. He's been building his case since I arrived. The night walks gave him ammunition. This isn't just about the walks, Rodriguez said. This guy targeted you from day one. Why? Michael had asked himself the same question countless times. Power play, maybe. Needed an enemy to rally his troops against. Or he's got something to hide, Taylor suggested. People who push hardest for security are often covering something. The doorbell interrupted their speculation. Michael checked the security camera feed on his phone. Eleanor, he said, moving to answer. Eleanor Lancaster stood on the porch, a casserole dish in her hands. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Rodriguez and Taylor behind Michael. You called in the cavalry, she observed, stepping inside. Good. You'll need it tonight. Rodriguez took the dish from her. Ma'am, Luis Rodriguez, James Taylor, Taylor added. Eleanor Lancaster. She assessed them with a quick glance that missed nothing. Force Recon, like Michael? Yes, ma'am, Rodriguez confirmed. Same unit. Eleanor nodded approvingly. David, my son, got a copy of the agenda for tonight's meeting. Palmer's pushing for an emergency security resolution, special assessment for additional cameras, formal complaint to the police department. On what grounds? Taylor asked. Creating a public disturbance, threatening behavior, psychological instability. Eleanor's disgust was evident. He's rounded up 7 residents who claim they feel unsafe with Michael in the neighborhood. Michael felt a familiar pressure building behind his eyes, the prelude to memories better left buried. He moved to the window, focusing on the present, the neighbor's sprinkler system, the mail carrier delivering packages, the afternoon light on Palmer's new security cameras. This isn't an HOA issue, Taylor said. It's harassment. David agrees, Eleanor replied. But Palmer's careful. He frames everything as community concerns and property value protection. Hard to prove malicious intent. Rodriguez had been studying the map on Michael's wall. These night walks. Always the same route? Michael nodded. And Palmer has cameras all along it now? Most of it. Plus neighbors watching from designated points. Rodriguez exchanged a look with Taylor, the silent communication of men who had worked together in high-stress environments. Tonight's meeting, Taylor said. We need to be there. No, Michael said quickly. That escalates things. Things are already escalated, brother. Rodriguez's voice was gentle but firm. You've been fighting a defensive action. Time to take some initiative. Eleanor smiled slightly. I like your friends, Michael. She turned to Rodriguez and Taylor. Meetings at 7. Community Center on Oak Street. Palmer will have his people there early to fill the seats. We'll handle it, Taylor assured her. After Eleanor left, the 3 men sat at Michael's kitchen table. A familiar configuration from countless mission briefings and tactical planning sessions. Start at the beginning, Rodriguez said. Everything about Palmer, from day one. Michael recounted it all. Palmer's initial coldness, the escalating surveillance, the confrontations, the police call, the floodlights that triggered his flashback. Classics. Intimidation tactics, Taylor observed. Isolation, surveillance, sleep deprivation, public humiliation attempts. He's building a case, Rodriguez agreed. Making you look unstable, so his extreme measures seem justified. The question is, why? Taylor added. This level of focus on one neighbor isn't normal. Even for an HOA tyrant. Michael had been asking himself the same question. Whatever his reason, he's effective. Half the neighborhood sees me as a threat now. And the other half? Rodriguez asked. Neutral. Uncomfortable. Except for Eleanor. Rodriguez leaned forward. Here's what we know. Palmer moved in 6 months ago. Immediately took control of the HOA. Started implementing security measures. Then you arrive. A combat veteran with PTSD who walks at night. And suddenly, you're his primary target. It's personal for him, Taylor said. The question is, are you a specific target or a convenient one? The three men fell silent, each considering the question from different angles, the tactical assessment instinct that had kept them alive in combat zones. Either way, Rodriguez finally said, we change the dynamic tonight. Palmer expects you alone, defensive, possibly unstable. Instead, he gets 3 of us. Calm, united, combat ready. Michael started to object, then stopped. The relief of not facing this alone was overwhelming. A weight lifted that he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. I started the new meds, he said. Doctor's orders. They'll take time to work, but good, Rodriguez said simply. One battle at a time. Taylor checked his watch. 4 hours until the meeting. We need to prepare. Michael watched his former teammates shift automatically into mission planning mode. Rodriguez pulling out a notebook, Taylor studying the neighborhood map with focused intensity. For the first time in months, Michael felt something close to hope. He wasn't alone on patrol anymore. The Oak Ridge Community Center was already crowded when Michael arrived with Rodriguez and Taylor. As Eleanor had predicted, Palmer's supporters occupied the front rows, a united front of concerned citizens in coordinated neighborhood watch polo shirts. Subtle, Rodriguez muttered. Eleanor waved them towards seats she'd saved in the middle section. As they moved through the room, conversations hushed momentarily, neighbors taking note of Michael's companions. Taylor kept his posture deliberately relaxed, his expression neutral. Rodriguez nodded politely to those who made eye contact. Both men flanked Michael instinctively, years of formation movement evident in their synchronized steps. David's here, Eleanor whispered as they sat, nodding toward the back where her son stood in civilian clothes, observing quietly. Unofficial capacity, Palmer entered last, carrying his leather portfolio and tablet, accompanied by 3 association board members. His stride faltered briefly when he noticed Michael's companions, but he recovered quickly, forcing a smile as he took his position at the front. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Palmer began. As you know, the safety and security of our community is the association's highest priority. Recent events have made it necessary to address certain concerns more urgently than our regular meeting schedule allows. His gaze fixed on Michael. Some of you have expressed discomfort with unusual activities in our neighborhood. Specifically, nighttime surveillance patterns conducted by a resident who has refused to adequately explain his behavior. Rodriguez shifted slightly in his seat. Taylor remained perfectly still, his eyes never leaving Palmer. The association has a responsibility to protect all residents, Palmer continued. We've prepared a resolution to expand our security measures and file a formal complaint with local authorities regarding disturbing behavior that has left many feeling unsafe in their homes. Mrs. Chen raised her hand from the second row. What specific behavior are we talking about? Just the walking? Palmer's smile tightened. The pattern suggests surveillance, preparation, possibly for criminal activity. That's speculation, Eleanor called out. Not evidence. We have documented evidence of aggressive behavior, Palmer countered, tapping his tablet. The screen behind him displayed the edited video of Michael's confrontation. Mr. Reeves has made threatening statements to multiple residents. Taken out of context, Eleanor said. Palmer ignored her. Additionally, last week, police responded to a disturbance involving Mr. Reeves exhibiting what appeared to be combat behavior in his front yard, potentially armed. Murmurs rippled through the room. That's a lie, Eleanor said, standing. It was a PTSD episode triggered by the security lights you deliberately installed pointing at his house. Mrs. Lancaster, please. I was there, she continued, her voice carrying. The police report confirms no weapons were found. Officer Davis can verify this. All eyes turned to the back of the room, where David Lancaster straightened slightly, but remained silent, his expression professional. Palmer recovered quickly. Nevertheless, the incident demonstrates the unpredictable nature of what, exactly? Rodriguez interrupted, rising to his feet. Of veterans with PTSD? Is that what you're suggesting, Mr. Palmer? Palmer assessed Rodriguez with a quick, dismissive glance. And you are? Luis Rodriguez, Force Recon Marine, same unit as Michael. I served with him for 6 years. Rodriguez's voice was calm but carried authority. I'm curious about your military experience, Mr. Palmer. Palmer's expression flickered. My service record isn't relevant to this discussion, isn't it? Rodriguez looked around the room. You're questioning the stability of a decorated combat veteran while positioning yourself as an authority on security threats. Seems relevant to me. Palmer's face flushed. This meeting is about community safety, not military credentials. It's about targeting a specific resident, Taylor said, standing beside Rodriguez. James Taylor, also Force Recon, also served with Michael. The room had gone completely silent, the dynamics shifting visibly as neighbors looked between Palmer and the 3 veterans now standing together. Michael Reeves walks at night because his doctors recommend it, Taylor continued. PTSD and traumatic brain injury from an IED blast make sleep difficult. The walking is prescribed therapy, not surveillance. We have only his word on that, Palmer said, but his confident tone had faltered. Michael stood slowly, the room's attention focused on him. I have documentation, he said quietly, removing the letter from Dr. Winters from his pocket. My VA psychiatrist has confirmed my condition. And treatment plan. I'm happy to provide this to the association board. He handed the letter to Mrs. Chen, who had approached from the front row. She scanned it quickly, then passed it to another board member. This appears to be in order, she said. Medical confirmation of PTSD and prescribed therapeutic activities. Palmer's jaw tightened. Medical condition or not, disruptive behavior affects property values and community safety. What exactly is disruptive about a man walking quietly through his own neighborhood? Eleanor demanded. The pattern, Palmer insisted. The timing, the note-taking. Routine helps manage symptoms, Rodriguez explained. The same route, the same time, the same duration. It's about creating predictability in an environment that feels chaotic to someone with combat PTSD. And the notes? Palmer challenged. Michael hesitated, then spoke. Grounding technique. Recording what's real versus what my mind might be adding. Dr. Winters suggested it. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly, understanding dawning. So this isn't about watching our homes. It's about staying present? Yes. Palmer sensed the room's shifting sentiment. Even if that's true, the potential for episodes like the one police responded to remains a concern. What happens when he has a more severe flashback? When he can't? Distinguish between Oak Ridge and Afghanistan? That's why he walks at night, Taylor said. When streets are empty, when the risk to others is minimal. And that's why your surveillance and harassment campaign is particularly cruel, Rodriguez added. You're deliberately making his symptoms worse. Palmer bristled. I resent the implication that Harrison, Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. Why don't you tell everyone where you were stationed during your military service? What unit? What years? The room fell silent again. Palmer's expression hardened. As I said, my service record is not relevant. Actually, David Lancaster spoke for the first time, stepping forward from the back of the room. It might be. All heads turned toward the police chief. Mr. Palmer, David continued, you filed 3 reports with my department regarding Mr. Reeves. In each one, you identified yourself as a former Army Ranger, 2nd Battalion. You cited this background as the reason you recognized Mr. Reeves's behavior as threatening. Palmer's face drained of color. I ran a standard background check, David said. Standard procedure when we receive multiple reports from the same individual. There's no record of your service in any branch of the military. The room erupted in whispers. Palmer's supporters exchanged confused glances. That's a privacy violation, Palmer stammered. My service record is classified. David shook his head. The fact of service isn't classified, Mr. Palmer, only specific operations, and there's no record of Harrison Palmer serving in any capacity. You're lying, Palmer said, his voice rising. This is a coordinated attack to discredit me. Is it true? Mrs. Chen asked, turning to Palmer. You've never served? Palmer looked around the room, at the faces now watching him with suspicion rather than support. This meeting is about Reeves, not me, he insisted. About the security threat he poses. The only threat I see, Eleanor said clearly, is the man who's been lying to this community while harassing a legitimate veteran. Palmer gathered his materials with shaking hands. This meeting is adjourned. We'll reconvene when cooler heads prevail. We're not finished, Mrs. Chen objected. The resolution hasn't been adjourned, Palmer repeated, louder, pushing past her toward the exit. The room dissolved into confused conversations as Palmer fled, his neighborhood watch supporters trailing uncertainly behind him. David Lancaster approached Michael and his teammates. I apologize for the public disclosure, he said, but his false claims of military service while targeting an actual veteran crossed a line. Stolen valor, Rodriguez said, the disgust evident in his voice. Explains a lot. Why target Michael? Specifically? Taylor asked. David shrugged. Some men need enemies to feel important. A combat veteran with PTSD moving into his territory. Perfect target to build his security crusade around. Eleanor joined them, satisfaction evident in her expression. The association board looks shell-shocked. I'd say Palmer's credibility is severely damaged. Michael watched through the window as Palmer hurried to his car, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing angrily. The threat wasn't neutralized. Wounded opponents could be more dangerous, not less, but the dynamic had shifted dramatically. Thank you, he said simply, to the people gathered around him. Rodriguez clapped him on the shoulder. Team still works. Pretty well together. Always did, Taylor agreed. As they left the community center, neighbors approached Michael, some to apologize, others to ask questions about PTSD, a few to simply introduce themselves properly for the first time. The isolation Palmer had engineered was cracking, connection by connection. Michael felt a weight lifting, not completely but enough to glimpse what recovery might actually look like. The morning after the meeting, Michael awoke to the sound of hammering. He checked the security cameras on his phone. Palmer was installing a new, larger neighborhood watch sign directly across from Michael's driveway. Doubling down, Rodriguez observed, peering over Michael's shoulder at the feed. Wounded ego. Taylor entered the kitchen, freshly showered and already dressed. Stolen valor types don't surrender easily. Their entire identity is built on the lie. The three men watched as Palmer positioned the sign for maximum visibility from Michael's property. He's lost credibility with the HOA, Michael said. But he still has supporters. Rodriguez nodded. The ones who need someone to blame for their own insecurities. They'll stick with him regardless of facts. Taylor poured coffee for all three of them. We need to consider countermeasures. Palmer's been publicly humiliated. That makes him unpredictable. Michael's phone rang. Eleanor, you've seen what our friend is up to this morning? She asked without preamble. The sign. Yes, that's just the beginning. He's called an emergency meeting of his watch captains. Private session at his house. How do you know? Eleanor chuckled. Mrs. Abernathy's grandson does yard work for half the neighborhood, currently trimming Palmer's hedges. Those watch captains aren't subtle about arriving. What's Palmer planning? Nothing good. David's looking into some things on his end. In the meantime, how are your friends settling in? Michael glanced at Rodriguez and Taylor, who were studying the neighborhood. Map on his wall. They're helping. Good. Keep them close. Palmer's wounded, which makes him dangerous. After hanging up, Michael relayed Eleanor's information to his teammates. Classic insurgent behavior, Taylor observed. When conventional forces fail, switch to guerrilla tactics. Smaller units, less formal structure, more deniable actions. We need to get ahead of this, Rodriguez said. Defensive posture isn't sustainable long-term. Michael knew they were right. The military mindset identified problems, assessed resources, and executed solutions. It didn't passively wait for attacks. What do you suggest? Community engagement, Taylor said immediately. Break the isolation Palmer created. Meet the neighbors on your terms, not his. And surveillance countermeasures, Rodriguez added. Those cameras along your route need adjustment. No tampering, Michael warned. Nothing illegal. Of course not, Rodriguez grinned. Just some creative landscaping. The day unfolded with the coordinated efficiency of a tactical operation. Taylor accompanied Michael to introduce himself to key neighbors, the Chens, the Hendersons, Mrs. Abernathy, others identified as potential allies. Each conversation was brief but purposeful, humanizing Michael beyond Palmer's unstable veteran narrative. Meanwhile, Rodriguez implemented what he called passive countermeasures, adjusting the angle of Michael's garden sprinklers to periodically spray Palmer's most invasive cameras, planting tall ornamental grasses that would gradually obscure sightlines, installing motion-activated solar lights that would create glare on camera lenses when triggered. Nothing permanent, Rodriguez explained. Nothing damaging, just making surveillance less comfortable. By mid-afternoon, Palmer's resistance had materialized. Anonymous reports to city code enforcement about Michael's property. Complaints about Rodriguez's truck blocking sightlines. A neighborhood watch car parked conspicuously across from Michael's house. Occupants photographing everyone who entered or left. Predictable, Taylor said, watching from the window. He's trying to reassert control through official channels. The doorbell rang. Michael checked the security feed. Mrs. Chen stood on the porch looking nervous. "Mr. Reeves," she said when he opened the door, "I wanted to apologize for my husband's involvement in Mr. Palmer's activities. He didn't understand the full situation. No apology necessary." She hesitated, then continued. "There's something else. Palmer is circulating documents to association members. About you." She handed Michael a folder. "These were in my husband's email this morning. I thought you should see them." Inside were printouts of what appeared to be military documents, heavily redacted after-action reports, personnel assessments, medical evaluations, all featuring Michael's name, all highlighting the most damaging details out of context. "These are classified," Michael said, his voice tight, "and altered." Mrs. Chen nodded unhappily. "I thought they might be. Palmer claims they prove you were discharged for psychological instability and violent tendencies." Michael's hands tightened on the folder. "These documents aren't publicly accessible. I'll leave them with you. My husband wanted no part of this. Once he saw them." Mrs. Chen hesitated. "Be careful, Mr. Reeves. Palmer seems desperate." After she left, Michael showed the documents to Rodriguez and Taylor. Their reactions mirrored his own, cold anger and professional assessment. "These are forgeries," Taylor said, examining the pages. "Good ones, but definitely fake. The formatting is wrong on the medical evaluations. The redactions are too convenient." "Enough. Truth mixed with lies to seem credible," Rodriguez added. "Classic disinformation tactic." Michael's phone rang again. David Lancaster. "Reeves, we need to talk," he said. "Palmer's filed a restraining order request against you. Claims you threatened him." "That's false. I know. But he's got witnesses lined up. 3 of his watch captains who claim they heard you make specific threats at the meeting last night." David sounded frustrated. "It won't stick, but it will take time to process through the system. He's trying to force legal proceedings." "Escalation," Taylor muttered when Michael relayed the information. "He's moving faster than anticipated." Rodriguez studied the forged documents again. "This isn't just wounded pride. This is methodical, targeted. He's using multiple vectors of attack simultaneously. But why?" Michael asked the question that had haunted him for months. "Why this level of focus on one neighbor?" The 3 men fell silent, each considering the question from different angles. Eleanor's earlier words echoed in Michael's mind. Men like Palmer need enemies to feel important, but this felt more specific, more personal. "What if it's not about you specifically?" Taylor suggested suddenly. "What if it's about what you represent?" "Meaning?" "Military, combat veteran, someone with legitimate credentials versus his stolen valor." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Your presence is a constant reminder of his lie. Every time neighbors see you, they're reminded he's a fraud." The theory made sense, but something still nagged at Michael. "There's more to it. This level of targeting feels familiar." His teammates exchanged glances, recognizing the tone. In the field, Michael's instincts had saved their lives more than once. "We need more intelligence," Taylor decided. "Time to go on offense." As darkness fell, Palmer's psychological warfare continued. The neighborhood watch car remained stationed outside, high beams occasionally flashing toward Michael's windows. Anonymous calls to Michael's phone, silent when answered. The security lights across the street, adjusted to activate whenever Michael's front door opened. Through it all, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Clarity of purpose. The fog of isolation was lifting, replaced by the focused determination that had once defined him. "Tonight's walk?" Rodriguez asked as the clock approached 2 a.m. Michael checked his new medication, the dose that Dr. Winters had prescribed, that he'd finally started taking. The side effects were as predicted: slight dizziness, dulled reflexes, but the constant edge of hypervigilance had softened. "I'm walking," he confirmed. "Same route, same time." Taylor nodded approvingly. "We'll maintain overwatch from here, document everything, build our case." Michael stepped out into the night, fully aware of the cameras tracking him, the neighbors watching from darkened windows. For the first time in months, their surveillance didn't trigger his defensive instincts. He had something Palmer would never understand: brothers who had his back, who knew his worst moments and stood by him anyway. Real strength, not the counterfeit. Authority Palmer clung to. Michael completed his route precisely as always. 47 minutes from start to finish. Each step a small victory over the man who had tried to weaponize his trauma against him. Eleanor's backyard became their forward operating base. Neutral territory away from Palmer's surveillance network. Michael, Rodriguez, and Taylor sat around her patio table, mugs of coffee growing cold as they laid out what they knew. The restraining order request was denied, David Lancaster reported, joining them with a folder of paperwork. Judge saw through it immediately, but Palmer's already filed an appeal. "And the forged documents?" Taylor asked. David shook his head. "Difficult to prove forgery without access to the originals, which are classified. But I've opened an investigation into potential identity theft and fraud." "He's escalating on multiple fronts," Rodriguez observed. "Legal harassment, character assassination, surveillance intimidation." Michael studied the neighborhood map they'd brought, now marked with Palmer's camera positions, watch patrol patterns, and ally locations. "There's something we're missing," he said. "This feels coordinated, almost professional." "Professional how?" Eleanor asked, setting fresh coffee on the table. Michael struggled to articulate the pattern he sensed. "In Afghanistan, we tracked insurgent cells. They had signature behaviors, communication patterns, movement rhythms, response tactics. Palmer's approach feels trained, not military, but something adjacent." David considered this. Before moving here, Palmer worked as a corporate security consultant for global tech industries, specialized in competitor intelligence and asset protection. Corporate espionage, Taylor translated. Legal version, but essentially, yes. David tapped the folder. "I did some digging. Global Tech had multiple lawsuits alleging their security. Division engaged in harassment campaigns against whistleblowers and rival executives, including surveillance, character assassination, and legal intimidation," Rodriguez said, connecting the dots. Michael felt the pieces clicking into place. "So Palmer has professional experience targeting individuals, creating pressure campaigns to force them out. But why target you specifically?" Eleanor asked. "Just because you're a real veteran and he's not?" David hesitated, then opened his folder. There might be more to it. Global Tech's biggest client was Miltech Defense Systems. The private military contractor? Taylor looked up sharply. "The same. And 5 years ago, Miltech had a major security breach. Classified operations details leaked to journalists. The leak was traced to their Afghanistan operations division. The implication hung in the air. Michael's final mission, the helicopter, the compound, the tragedy, had involved contractor support. The details were classified, but the connection was impossible to ignore. "You think Palmer knows about my last mission?" Michael asked quietly. "I think it's possible he knows you were there," David replied carefully. "Miltech took a major stock hit after the leak. Executives lost millions. They never identified the source, but they suspected someone with direct operational knowledge. Someone like a Force Recon Marine who was on the ground," Rodriguez said grimly. The theory was circumstantial but compelling. If Palmer had worked, security for the company affected by the leak, and suspected Michael had been involved, that would explain the intensity of his focus, Taylor said. "It's not just about stolen valor or neighborhood control. It's personal, but I had nothing to do with any leak," Michael objected. Doesn't matter, David said. In Palmer's mind, you represent something that cost his employers millions. His obsession with security, with threats in the neighborhood. It fits the profile. Eleanor had been listening silently. Now she spoke, her voice firm. So what do we do about it? The question hung in the air. Military training offered clear protocols for enemy combatants. Civilian disputes were murkier territory. We need to translate this for civilians, Rodriguez said finally. Medical documentation, legal statements, community support, all the things that matter in this environment. Exactly, Taylor agreed. This isn't a battlefield, it's a neighborhood. Different rules of engagement. Michael nodded slowly. We need to make my situation understandable to people who've never served, who don't know what PTSD actually means. A community presentation, Eleanor suggested. Educational. About veterans, PTSD, and reintegration challenges. With proper framing, David added. Not about Palmer directly, but about supporting veterans in the community. The idea took shape around the table. An information operation adapted for civilian context. Facts instead of rifles. Understanding instead of fear. We'll need help, Michael said. Credible speakers. Medical professionals. I can call Dr. Winters, Rodriguez offered. She does community outreach for the VA. And I can secure the community center, Eleanor said. As a former board member, I still have privileges. We document everything Palmer does in the meantime, David advised. Every camera, every patrol, every communication, build the paper trail. The plan felt right. Proactive without being aggressive. Educational rather than confrontational. A path forward that didn't require retreating or surrendering ground. One thing we need to address, Taylor said, his expression serious. The medications, Michael. The treatment protocol. You need to commit fully. Michael tensed. The medications remained a complicated subject. Necessary but frightening. Healing but vulnerability-inducing. The side effects are temporary, Rodriguez interrupted gently. I've seen you these past few days, brother. The hypervigilance is eating you alive. The flashbacks are getting worse, not better. Michael looked away, unable to deny the truth of it. The constant state of alert had become unsustainable, physically and mentally depleting. It's not surrender, Taylor said, reading his hesitation. It's tactical adaptation. Different terrain requires different equipment. Eleanor reached across the table, her weathered hand covering Michael's briefly. Frank fought the medications for years, said they made him less of a soldier. In the end, he realized they made him more of a human. The words landed precisely. Michael had been approaching his condition like an enemy to be defeated through willpower alone, rather than an injury requiring proper treatment. Okay, he said finally. Full protocol, as prescribed. The relief on his teammates' faces was evident. They'd seen too many brothers lost to the invisible wounds of war, the ones that continued killing long after the battlefield was left behind. Now, David said, returning to the operational planning, let's talk specifics for this community presentation. The afternoon passed in focused activity. Calls made, resources secured, strategies developed. The precise, collaborative efficiency that had once characterized their military operations now directed toward a different kind of mission. As evening approached, Eleanor insisted they stay for dinner, the kitchen filled with the unfamiliar sound of conversation and occasional laughter. Michael found himself watching his teammates. Rodriguez, explaining a tactical gardening approach to Eleanor, Taylor, and David, discussing security protocols for the presentation. These connections, this support network forming around him, were exactly what Palmer had worked so hard to prevent. The isolation had been strategic, designed to make Michael vulnerable, to amplify his symptoms until he removed himself. You okay? Rodriguez asked quietly, noticing Michael's silence. Yeah, Michael replied, and meant it. Just processing. One day at a time, brother. Rodriguez clasped his shoulder briefly. Translation takes time. Outside, darkness was falling. Soon it would be time for Michael's night walk, the routine that had inadvertently started this conflict. But tonight would be different. Tonight he understood more clearly what he was fighting, and who was fighting beside him. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in months, victory seemed possible. Michael surveyed the materials spread across his dining room table. Foam core boards, printouts of brain scans, medical diagrams, photographs, and precise architectural tools. The clock read 0200, normally his walking time. But tonight, a different therapy took precedence. Still can't believe Dr. Winters agreed to this, Rodriguez said, carefully cutting along a line Michael had drawn. She said, visualization techniques help externalize the internal, Michael replied, focusing on the model taking shape before him, making the invisible visible. The idea had come during his latest session with Dr. Winters, how to translate his experience for people who had never served, how to make PTSD comprehensible to civilians who equated it with weakness or instability. The answer? Make it tangible. Build a physical model demonstrating how trauma rewires the brain. Show, rather than tell. Taylor entered with coffee for all three of them. Perimeter's quiet. Palmer's night watch is down to one car at the corner. Looks like they're getting bored with the surveillance routine. Michael nodded, but remained focused on the precise placement of colored wires within the brain model. Each represented neural pathways, red for hyperarousal, blue for memory processing, green for emotional regulation. The model was technically accurate but visually intuitive, designed to communicate complex neurological concepts to a non-medical audience. This reminds me of that field hospital in Kandahar, Rodriguez observed. Remember, you built that terrain, model for the medical evac teams using dental plaster and colored string. Michael's hands paused briefly. I'd forgotten about that. Saved lives. They used your model to plan extraction routes for 6 months after we left. The memory shifted something in Michael. A reminder that his abilities extended beyond combat. That precision and detail could heal as well as harm. You've always had this gift, Taylor added, taking complicated systems and making them understandable to others. Michael continued working, uncomfortable with the praise, but absorbing it nonetheless. The medications had begun stabilizing in his system, the side effects lessening, leaving space for moments of clarity that had been rare in recent months. How old were you when you started building models? Rodriguez asked, handing Michael a precisely cut piece of foam core. 8, maybe 9. The memory surfaced gently, rather than crashing through his defenses. After my father's first deployment, he brought back a model tank kit. We built it together whenever he called from overseas. You ever show your daughter? The question caught Michael off guard. His hands stilled completely. I don't have children. Rodriguez looked up, confused. Sophia? You talked about her all the time in country. Had her picture in your gear. Taylor shot Rodriguez a warning glance, but it came too late. My niece, Michael said quietly. My sister's daughter. They died. Car accident. Senior year of high school. Understanding crossed Rodriguez's face. Brother, I'm sorry. It's fine. Michael returned to his work. Movements more mechanical now. Long time ago. The room fell silent except for the soft sounds of construction. Both his teammates recognized the withdrawal, respected the boundary it represented. After several minutes, Michael spoke again, his voice carefully neutral. I used to build models with Sophia. Dollhouses, spaceships, whatever she was interested in that month. Rodriguez and Taylor remained silent, giving him space to continue or stop as needed. After the accident, I couldn't. Building things reminded me of her. Michael connected a red wire to the amygdala section of the brain model. That's how it works. The brain connects things. Events to emotions, places to memories, triggers to responses. He pointed to the model. The hippocampus, this section here, processes contextual information. Helps you recognize that a car backfiring isn't a gunshot, that a memory is just a memory, not current reality. Taylor nodded. But trauma damages that processing. Exactly. TBI, PTSD. They interfere with the brain's ability to contextualize, to separate then from now. Michael's explanation was precise, clinical, distancing himself from the personal. Implications. That's what this model demonstrates, how trauma creates physical changes in neural pathways. Rodriguez studied the model with new understanding. So, when Palmer's lights triggered your flashback, my brain couldn't distinguish between the strobe lights here and the helicopter searchlights there. Past and present collapsed. Michael connected another wire. The medications help rebuild those contextual pathways, strengthen the hippocampus function, reduce amygdala reactivity. The explanation was textbook perfect, but beneath it lay the raw truth. that each flashback transported him completely, that the fear and guilt and impossible choices lived again in those moments, fresh as the day they happened. Taylor seemed to read his thoughts. The model's good, Michael. It'll help people understand. But your personal testimony will make it real for them. Michael tensed. I can't discuss the mission details, not asking you to, but sharing how PTSD affects daily life, the hypervigilance, the sleep disturbance, the triggers. That's what will translate your experience for civilians. The idea of such vulnerability in front of the neighborhood, in front of Palmer, sent a wave of resistance through Michael. Military training emphasized compartmentalization, control, containment of emotional responses. Public disclosure felt like surrendering tactical advantage. Think about it, Rodriguez suggested, recognizing Michael's hesitation. The model alone will be effective. Your voice would make it powerful. They worked through the night, the model growing more detailed and refined. By dawn, it stood complete, a three-dimensional representation of trauma's neurological impact, with lighting elements that demonstrated how trigger events activated different brain regions. Rodriguez stepped back, admiring their work. Dr. Winters is going to be impressed. It's accurate, Michael said simply. The science is solid, and the presentation is tomorrow evening, Taylor reminded them. Eleanor confirmed 28 residents have RSVP'd, including 3 association board members. Michael studied the model, feeling both pride in its execution and apprehension about its purpose. The community presentation represented a significant tactical shift, from defensive isolation to proactive engagement. Palmer will be there, he said. He'll try to undermine it. Let him, Rodriguez replied. Every time he attacks, he reveals more about himself than you. Taylor nodded agreement. The objective isn't to defeat Palmer, it's to educate the community. Change the narrative. Michael understood the strategy intellectually, but emotionally, the prospect of standing exposed before neighbors who had watched and judged him for months remained daunting. As if reading his thoughts, Rodriguez added, You won't be alone up there. Dr. Winters will lead the medical portions. Eleanor will moderate. We'll handle security and logistics. And David will attend in uniform, Taylor said. Official police department endorsement. The support network they described had materialized in just days. Professional, community, and personal resources aligned toward a common objective. The isolation Palmer had engineered was dissolving, connection by connection. Michael's phone chimed with a medication reminder. He took the pills without the hesitation that had characterized earlier days, accepting them as necessary tactical equipment rather than admission of weakness. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Sprinklers activated. Cars backed from driveways. Children waited for school buses. The ordinary rhythms of civilian life that had once seemed alien to Michael now represented the normalcy he was fighting to reclaim. Across the street, Palmer emerged from his house, pausing to stare directly at Michael's windows before getting into his BMW and driving away. He knows something's happening, Taylor observed. He's been too quiet lately. He'll make a move before the presentation, Rodriguez predicted. Try to discredit or derail it. Michael nodded, the familiar tactical assessment bringing clarity rather than anxiety. Then we prepare countermeasures, standard protocol. For the first time in months, Michael felt the return of something he'd thought lost forever. Not just the camaraderie of his teammates, but his own capacity for strategic thinking, for measured response, for controlled strength rather than hypervigilant reactivity. The model on the table represented more than neurological pathways. It embodied the translation now occurring within Michael himself, military experience into civilian context, trauma response into recovery process, isolation into community. One neural pathway at a time, one connection rebuilding another. Palmer's counterattack came at 09:45 the next morning, not directly, but through official channels carefully selected for maximum disruption. Michael was securing the brain model for transport when Rodriguez called from the front yard. Company, coming. Association vehicle. Looks like an inspection team. Through the security feed, Michael watched as a white SUV with the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association logo parked at the curb. 3 people emerged. Mrs. Chen, representing the board, a man in a blazer carrying a clipboard, and Harrison Palmer, wearing an expression of somber concern that didn't reach his eyes. Convenient timing, Taylor observed from the kitchen doorway. Day of the presentation. Michael opened the door before they could knock. Palmer's momentary surprise at Michael's calm demeanor quickly vanished behind his practiced, professional smile. Mr. Reeves, he began, the association has received multiple complaints about potential code violations on your property. As treasurer, I'm obligated to accompany the inspection team. Mrs. Chen looked uncomfortable. This is Mr. Jameson from County Compliance. Standard procedure for all complaints. Of course, Michael replied evenly. What specific violations are alleged? Palmer consulted a document with exaggerated thoroughness. Unauthorized security modifications to exterior structures, improper water drainage affecting neighboring properties, potential hazardous materials storage, all fabricated, all requiring extensive inspection to disprove, all strategically timed to consume the hours needed for presentation preparation. Happy to address those concerns, Michael said, but I'll need to see the formal complaints, written and filed according to association bylaws, Article 4, Section 7. Palmer's smile tightened. I have them right here. Submitted at least 5 business days before inspection, Michael continued, with notification provided in writing to the property owner at least 72 hours in advance. As specified in the covenant agreement. Mrs. Chen looked sharply at Palmer. Were proper notifications provided, Mr. Palmer? Given the nature of the alleged violations, we expedited the process. That would be a no, Rodriguez interjected, from where he stood by the garden. Procedural violation of homeowner rights under association bylaws. The county inspector, Mr. Jameson, shifted uncomfortably. I need to see documentation that proper notification was given. Otherwise, this inspection isn't authorized. Palmer's facade cracked slightly, frustration bleeding through. The complaints are legitimate. Then they'll still be legitimate, after proper procedures are followed, Mrs. Chen said firmly. Her expression suggested this wasn't the first time Palmer had circumvented protocols. Mr. Jameson, I apologize for the confusion. The association will reschedule after appropriate. Notifications have been provided. Palmer's jaw tightened. Mrs. Chen, as treasurer, I must insist, as acting president in Mrs. Abernathy's absence, I'm overriding your insistence, she replied crisply. We will follow proper procedures, Mr. Palmer. Always. The inspection team departed, leaving Palmer standing alone on the walkway, his carefully orchestrated disruption collapsing around him. This isn't over, Reeves, he said quietly. Your little presentation won't change anything. This neighborhood knows what you are. Michael met his gaze steadily. And what am I exactly? Palmer stepped closer, voice lowered. Someone who was there. Someone who knows what happened that night. Someone Miltech has been looking for. The confirmation of their theory landed with precision. This was never about neighborhood security or property values. It was about Michael's final mission, the classified operation involving military contractors, the tragedy that had haunted him since. I don't know what you think I did, Michael said carefully, but you're mistaken, am I? Palmer's smile returned, colder now. 3 contractors died that night. Millions in equipment lost. Stock value plummeted. Someone talked to journalists. Afterward, someone with inside knowledge. It wasn't me. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is making things right. Palmer straightened his jacket. You've cost people a great deal, Mr. Reeves. My job is to ensure you don't cost them anything more. Before Michael could respond, a black Suburban with government plates turned onto the street, moving slowly toward his house. Palmer followed Michael's gaze, his expression faltering. What's this? The vehicle stopped behind Palmer's BMW. 2 men in suits emerged, unmistakably federal agents in their bearing and appearance. They approached with the measured confidence of authority figures accustomed to deference. Mr. Reeves? The taller agent asked, displaying credentials briefly. Agent Wilson, Department of Defense. This is Agent Carver. We need to speak with you. Palmer stepped forward immediately. I'm Harrison Palmer, Homeowners Association Treasurer and Neighborhood Security Coordinator. Whatever concerns you have about Mr. Reeves, I'd be happy to provide additional context. Agent Wilson barely glanced at him. Sir, this is a matter of national security. Please return to your vehicle. But I have information about Mr. Reeves. Sir, Agent Carver's tone left no room for argument. Return to your vehicle immediately, or we'll have you removed from the scene. Palmer retreated, his expression a mixture of frustration and calculation as he watched from beside his BMW. "Mr. Reeves," Agent Wilson continued. "May we come inside?" Michael led them into his living room, Rodriguez and Taylor positioning themselves strategically, present but not intrusive, alert but not threatening. The agents noted their presence but made no comment. "We understand you've been experiencing some neighborhood difficulties," Agent Wilson began once they were seated. "How did you know that?" Michael asked. "We monitor situations involving certain former operators," Agent Carver replied, "particularly those whose final missions remain classified." Michael's posture remained deliberately neutral. "What exactly are you here for?" Agent Wilson opened his briefcase and removed a folder. "We're here because your name has appeared in some concerning communications, specifically in connection with the classified Operation Amber Shield and alleged intelligence leaks." "I had nothing to do with any leak," Michael said immediately. "We're aware." Agent Wilson placed several documents on the coffee table. "These are transcripts of emails sent from Harrison Palmer to executives at Miltech Defense Systems over the past 6 months. Your name appears in 17 of them." Michael scanned the pages, Rodriguez and Taylor reading over his shoulder. The due emails revealed Palmer's methodical surveillance campaign, his theories about Michael's involvement in the leak, his promises to Miltech to handle the situation in exchange for consulting fees. "Palmer's been operating as a private contractor," Agent Carver explained, "using his position in the neighborhood to conduct unofficial surveillance on a former military operator. That's a federal offense." "How did you get these?" Taylor asked. "Miltech is currently under federal investigation for contract violations," Agent Wilson replied. "These communications emerged during standard evidence collection." "So Palmer was right about one thing," Rodriguez observed. "Miltech is looking for someone to blame for their stock collapse, and willing to pay for questionable intelligence gathering," Agent Carver added. "Unfortunately for Mr. Palmer, his activities crossed several legal boundaries." Michael studied the agents carefully. "What happens now?" "That depends partly on you." Agent Wilson closed the folder. "We can pursue charges against Palmer for harassment, unauthorized surveillance, and impersonating a federal contractor. But that would involve public proceedings that might touch on classified operations." The implication was clear. Legal action meant public exposure. Details Michael had worked to keep buried, memories he struggled daily to contain. "Alternatively," Agent Carver continued, "we can handle this more discreetly. Palmer receives a formal cease and desist order with the clear understanding that continued actions will result in immediate federal charges. No public proceedings," Michael said. "Correct. But also no formal justice for what he's put you through." Michael considered the options, weighing justice against privacy, vindication against exposure. "The presentation tonight," he said finally. "Let it proceed as planned. After that, I'll decide which approach to take." The agents exchanged glances. "That seems reasonable," Agent Wilson agreed. "We'll maintain surveillance on Palmer in the SAU. Meantime, ensure he doesn't escalate further." As they prepared to leave, Agent Carver handed Michael a business card. "For the record, Mr. Reeves, the investigation into the Amber Shield leak was closed 6 months ago. The source was identified as a Miltech executive who sold information to hedge funds before releasing it to journalists. It was never you," Agent Wilson added. "Palmer's been pursuing the wrong man from the beginning." After they departed, Michael watched through the window as the agents approached Palmer, still waiting by his car. Their conversation was brief but intense, Palmer's body language shifting from confident to defensive to defeated in the span of minutes. "Federal pressure," Taylor observed. "That changes the equation significantly. He'll back down now," Rodriguez predicted. "Men like Palmer fold when real authority steps in." Michael wasn't so certain. He'd seen the look in Palmer's eyes, the desperate calculation of a man whose carefully constructed narrative was collapsing. Such men often became more dangerous, not less, when cornered. "We proceed as planned," he said. "The presentation happens tonight regardless of federal involvement. This was never just about Palmer." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "About healing, about community, about transition." "Exactly." Michael turned from the window to the brain model waiting on his dining table. "It's time to translate military experience into civilian understanding. That doesn't change just because Palmer's motives are exposed." Across the street, Palmer watched the federal agents drive away, his expression unreadable at this distance. The battle had shifted yet again, but Michael sensed it wasn't over. Some enemies retreated only to regroup. That lesson, at least, translated perfectly from battlefield to neighborhood. The Oak Ridge Community Center transformed under their coordinated efforts, no longer the sterile meeting space of HOA arguments, but an educational environment designed for understanding. Michael supervised the placement of each element with tactical precision. "Screen centered here," he directed, as Rodriguez and Taylor positioned the projection equipment. "Brain model on the table to the right. Literature station by the entrance." Dr. Winters arrived early to review the setup, her professional assessment validating their approach. "This is impressive, Michael. Better than most VA outreach events I've conducted." Eleanor managed check-in arrangements while David Lancaster, in a full police chief uniform, helped arrange seating to maximize visibility and comfort. The room hummed with purposeful activity, each person executing their assigned role in the operation. "Palmer's here," Taylor reported quietly, having conducted a perimeter check. "Parked across the street. Watching, not entering yet." Michael nodded, continuing his preparations. Palmer's presence was anticipated, his potential disruption accounted for in their planning. Whatever happened tonight, they were ready. Residents began arriving 30 minutes before the scheduled start. Curious neighbors, association board members, even some of Palmer's former watch captains, now uncertain of their allegiances after the morning's federal intervention. Michael greeted each arrival with a calm professionalism that belied his internal tension. This level of voluntary social interaction represented a significant step beyond his comfort zone. Yet the structure of the event, its clear purpose and defined parameters, made it manageable. "Quite a turnout," Eleanor observed as the seats filled. 42 attendees so far more than regular association meetings. At precisely 7 p.m., Eleanor stepped to the podium to begin the program. Michael took his position beside the brain model, Dr. Winters at his side, Rodriguez and Taylor positioned strategically around the perimeter. "Welcome, neighbors," Eleanor began. "Thank you for joining us for this important community education event, understanding PTSD and supporting veterans in civilian communities. Our goal tonight is to foster understanding, dispel misconceptions, and strengthen our neighborhood through knowledge." The presentation unfolded according to plan, Dr. Winters providing the medical foundation, Eleanor facilitating transitions, and Michael demonstrating the brain model's visualization of trauma responses. The audience listened attentively, many taking notes, some nodding in recognition of experiences with family members who had served. "The brain's response to trauma isn't a weakness or failure," Dr. Winters explained, gesturing to Michael's detailed model. "It's a normal reaction to abnormal circumstances. The same neurological adaptations that help survive combat become challenging in civilian environments." Michael activated the lighting elements in the model, illuminating different neural pathways, as Dr. Winters described them. The visual impact was powerful, making invisible wounds visible, translating complex neuroscience into understandable concepts. Halfway through the presentation, Palmer finally entered, positioning himself at the back of the room. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes tracked Michael's every movement with barely concealed hostility. "Now," Eleanor continued, "I'd like to invite Michael to share some of his personal experience with PTSD and reintegration challenges." This was the moment Michael had debated internally for days, whether to speak personally or remain behind the scientific explanations. Rodriguez and Taylor had encouraged disclosure, believing that personal testimony would resonate more deeply than clinical descriptions. Michael stepped to the podium, acutely aware of Palmer watching from the back, of neighbors who had once viewed him with suspicion now listening expectantly. His prepared remarks lay before him, but as he looked out at the community, different words formed. "When I moved to Oak Ridge," he began, "I was seeking quiet, structure, safety. After 8 years in the Marines, including combat deployments and a traumatic brain injury from an IED explosion, civilian life felt unpredictable." The room remained silent, attentive to each word. "PTSD isn't what movies portray," Michael continued. "It's not always dramatic flashbacks or violent outbursts. Often it's hypervigilance, constantly scanning for threats that aren't there. It's sleep disturbance, nightmares or insomnia that leave you exhausted. It's avoidance, steering clear of situations that might trigger memories." He gestured to the brain model, As Dr. Winters explained, these are neurological responses. My night walks, which some found concerning, are prescribed therapy. Movement helps process trauma. Nighttime offers fewer sensory triggers. The consistent route provides predictability. My brain needs to feel safe. Michael paused, gathering himself for the most personal disclosure. What many don't understand is that PTSD isn't just about what happened to you in combat. It's often about impossible choices made in impossible situations. About responsibility that doesn't end when you leave the battlefield. From the back of the room, Palmer shifted position, his posture tense but still silent. Recovery isn't linear. Michael continued. It has setbacks. Medications help rebuild neural pathways. Therapy provides processing tools. But community, understanding neighbors, patient support networks, those make sustainable healing possible. His gaze swept the room, briefly meeting Palmer's before moving on. What I've learned these past months is that isolation worsens symptoms. Connection improves them. That's why tonight matters. Not just for me, but for any veteran trying to reintegrate, any community member trying to understand. When Michael finished, the silence held for several heartbeats before applause began. Tentative at first, then growing stronger. Dr. Winters stepped forward to field questions, giving Michael a moment to collect himself after the emotional exertion. Of public vulnerability, Rodriguez appeared at his side. Well done, brother. Couldn't have said it better myself. The question period revealed the presentation's impact. Neighbors asked thoughtful questions about supporting veterans, recognizing PTSD symptoms, creating trauma-informed community spaces. Several shared stories of family members who had served, struggles they'd witnessed but never fully understood, until now. Throughout, Palmer remained at the back, silent but watchful. Michael noticed him taking notes, occasionally typing on his phone, documentation continuing even here. As the formal presentation concluded, residents approached the information stations, examined the brain model up close, spoke with Dr. Winters about resources. Michael found himself engaged in more direct social interaction than he'd experienced since discharge, answering questions, accepting expressions of support, even receiving apologies from former watch members who had participated in Palmer's surveillance campaign. This changed minds, Taylor observed, surveying the room. You can see it happening in real time. Mrs. Chen approached Michael with evident emotion. My father served in Vietnam. He never spoke about his experiences, but he had many of the symptoms you described. I wish I had understood then what I know now. Similar revelations occurred throughout the room. Connections formed, perspectives shifted, community strengthened through shared understanding. Eleanor joined them, satisfaction evident in her expression. 47 attendees total, almost half the neighborhood. And the association board members are discussing making veteran support an official community initiative. As the event wound down, Michael noticed Palmer slipping out early, his expression unreadable. The federal warning had apparently curtailed his public opposition, but the private animosity remained palpable. Keep an eye on him, Michael murmured. To Taylor, he's too quiet. Already on it, Taylor confirmed. Rodriguez is monitoring outside. The cleanup process proceeded with the same efficient coordination as setup. Neighbors lingered, helping stack chairs and collect materials, engaging Michael in conversation that no longer carried the undercurrent of suspicion that had characterized previous interactions. A successful operation, David Lancaster said, as the last residents departed. Clear objective achieved. Community engagement established. Michael nodded, appreciating the military framing. One battle in a longer campaign, but a decisive one. Eleanor added, Palmer's narrative has been countered with facts, science, and personal testimony. Hard to maintain fear-mongering after this. As they loaded the last equipment into Michael's truck, Rodriguez rejoined them, his expression concerned. Palmer's been circling the block. Made 4 passes while we were finishing up. Surveillance continues, Taylor observed, but with diminished effect, David pointed out. His credibility is damaged, his accusations undermined by tonight's presentation. Michael said nothing, sensing something in Palmer's behavior that concerned him. The desperation of a man whose carefully constructed campaign was failing, whose promises to his Miltech contacts remained unfulfilled. Such men became unpredictable, dangerous in new ways. We maintain vigilance, he said simply. The presentation was successful, but Palmer isn't neutralized. His teammates nodded, understanding the assessment. This wasn't over yet. 3 days after the presentation, the neighborhood felt different. Neighbors waved when Michael collected his mail. Mrs. Abernathy brought homemade cookies. The Chen family invited him to their weekend barbecue. Small gestures of inclusion that would have seemed ordinary in any other context, but represented significant shift in Oak Ridge. Palmer, meanwhile, had gone conspicuously quiet. His security lights remained dark. His cameras appeared inactive. His BMW hadn't left the garage in days. Too quiet, Taylor observed as they monitored the situation from Michael's living room. Like he's gone to ground, or regrouping, Rodriguez suggested. Men like Palmer don't just surrender. Michael agreed with both assessments. The federal warning had disrupted Palmer's overt harassment, but the underlying motivation remained. If Palmer truly believed Michael had cost his Miltech employers millions, that vendetta wouldn't dissolve overnight. I've been cleared to return. To work next week, Michael said, checking his phone. Dr. Winters says the medication levels have stabilized. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Sleep patterns are better. Hypervigilance reduced. You're calmer, Taylor added. More present. The observation was accurate. The medication, therapy, and community support had combined to create tangible improvement. Michael's flashbacks hadn't disappeared, but their intensity and frequency had diminished. The constant edge of alertness had softened to manageable awareness. Your leave ends tomorrow, doesn't it? Michael asked Rodriguez. Yeah, back to Fort Benning for training rotation. Taylor ships out next week. The reminder of their imminent departure created mixed emotions. Their presence had been stabilizing, their understanding unique. Yet Michael recognized he couldn't rely on them indefinitely. Recovery meant developing sustainable support systems within his civilian environment. I'll be fine, he said, addressing their unspoken concern. We know you will, Rodriguez replied. Eleanor's adopted you. David checks in regularly. Half the neighborhood feels guilty for buying into Palmer's campaign. And we're just a phone call away, Taylor added. Always. The bonds forged in combat didn't break with distance. Michael knew this, but the prospect of facing Palmer's next move without his teammates' physical presence remained concerning. Last night walk before you go, Michael suggested. The original route. Rodriguez grinned. For old time's sake. They set out at Michael's usual time, 0217, precisely on schedule. The neighborhood slept around them, peaceful in the summer night. Michael led them along his established path, explaining the mental checkpoints and grounding techniques he used at each landmark. The Jensen's oak tree marks 1/4 distance. I count the major branches, 17. The Miller's fountain is halfway. The sound of water helps reset my focus. The corner playground is 3/4. I touch the swing set to confirm it's real, not memory. Taylor and Rodriguez followed, listening, understanding the ritual in ways civilians couldn't. They reached the final stretch, the small park with its wooden gazebo where Palmer had once confronted Michael. Something's different, Michael said. Stopping abruptly, his teammates froze instantly, combat instincts engaging without question. There, Michael pointed toward the gazebo. Light reflection, metal. In the shadows of the structure, barely visible in the ambient moonlight, a glint of something metallic caught the streetlight. Out of place, deliberately positioned. Could be nothing, Rodriguez said quietly. Could be something, Taylor countered. Standard threat assessment protocol? Michael nodded. I'll approach from the front. Rodriguez, circle left. Taylor, right. Flank! They moved with practiced coordination, spreading out to approach the gazebo from multiple angles. As Michael drew closer, the object became clearer. A small metallic device attached to one of the support posts, wires extending to what appeared to be a motion sensor. Stop, Michael called softly. Everyone hold position. The device was unmistakable. To someone with their training, an improvised explosive device, crude but potentially effective, with a motion-triggered detonator positioned to activate when someone entered the gazebo. IED, Taylor confirmed, having circled to a better vantage point. Homemade but real. Timer component, Rodriguez added from his position. Digital display counting down. 7 minutes remaining. Michael processed this information with the calm clarity that had once been his defining characteristic in combat situations. Evacuate adjacent houses. Call David Lancaster. I'll assess the device. Michael, Rodriguez began. I have the most EOD training, Michael reminded him. And it's my neighborhood. Go. His teammates hesitated briefly, then moved with urgent purpose toward the nearest homes. Michael approached the gazebo carefully, analyzing the device from multiple angles before drawing closer. The construction was amateurish but dangerous, commercial-grade fireworks bound together, modified with additional compounds likely sourced from household chemicals. The trigger mechanism was more sophisticated. Motion sensor connected to a digital timer that would activate the detonator once it reached 0, regardless of motion detection. 6 minutes remaining. Michael recognized the design from his training, not military grade, but similar to insurgent devices he'd encountered overseas. The kind of thing someone could construct using online instructions and commercially available components. The kind of thing Palmer would have encountered in his corporate security work, perhaps in training scenarios or threat assessments. The realization solidified. This was Palmer's desperate countermove. After failing to drive Michael out through surveillance and intimidation, after losing credibility with the neighborhood and facing federal pressure, he had escalated to physical threat. 5 minutes. Michael knew the evacuation would take at least that long. The device wasn't sophisticated, but its placement was calculated, directly on his walking route, in a structure he passed regularly, with enough explosive material to cause significant damage. Not enough to destroy houses, but enough to injure or kill anyone in the gazebo. He had 3 options: attempt to disarm it, call for professional EOD response, or clear the area and allow detonation. Only the first option would prevent damage and potential casualties if evacuation wasn't completed in time. 4 minutes. Michael made his decision. Reaching into his pocket, he removed the small toolkit he still carried from his service days. Habit or preparation, depending on perspective. The device used a simple circuit. Disconnecting the right wire would prevent detonation. But which wire? The construction wasn't standard military. The components were civilian, arranged with dangerous ignorance of proper explosive handling. Michael studied the connections, tracing each wire's path through the device. Red to the timer, blue to the motion sensor, yellow to the detonator, black connecting the power source. 3 minutes. In proper EOD protocol, the black wire, power source, would be the safe disconnection point. But this wasn't proper construction. The redundant connections suggested cutting power might trigger immediate detonation instead. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Michael heard sirens in the distance. David responding to Rodriguez's call. Professional help coming, but not in time. The yellow wire. It had to be the yellow wire, connecting timer to detonator. Michael steadied his hands, the old training asserting itself. Controlled breathing, focused attention, precise movement. 2 minutes. He reached for the yellow wire, small cutters poised to sever the connection. Stop right there, Reeves. Palmer's voice came from behind him. Unexpected, but somehow not surprising. Michael turned slowly, maintaining his position near the device. Palmer stood at the edge of the park, a phone held in his outstretched hand. 1 call and a secondary. Device activates, something much bigger, much closer to houses. There is no secondary device, Michael said with certainty. You barely manage this one. Palmer's expression flickered. Confirmation enough. Step away from the gazebo. Let it detonate. Consider it justice for the contractors who died on your watch. 1 minute, 30 seconds. This isn't justice, Michael replied calmly. It's criminal. Action. Federal offense. Terrorism charges. Worth it to expose you. Palmer's voice had taken on a desperate edge. To finish what I started. The sirens grew louder. Rodriguez and Taylor would be returning any moment. Evacuations completed. 1 minute. Palmer, Michael said carefully. Harrison, you've been pursuing the wrong man from the beginning. The feds already identified the Miltech leak. It wasn't me. It was an executive selling information to hedge funds. You're lying. The investigation closed 6 months ago. The agents who visited confirmed it. Uncertainty crossed Palmer's face. Miltech hired me to find the leak. To make things right. They used you, Michael said simply. Fed you false intelligence about my involvement. Kept you pursuing a convenient scapegoat while the real culprits covered their tracks. 45 seconds. Palmer's hand trembled slightly. You're trying to distract me. I'm trying to prevent you from adding terrorism to stolen valor charges. Michael held his gaze steadily. You're not a soldier, Harrison. You never were. Don't become a bomber, too. Something shifted in Palmer's expression, reality penetrating the narrative he'd constructed. The sirens were blocks away now. Lights visible at the edge of the neighborhood. 30 seconds. Let me disarm it, Michael said. Before it's too late for both of us. Palmer stood frozen, indecision evident in his posture. Harrison, this won't solve anything. 20 seconds. Palmer's shoulders slumped slightly. The phone lowered. Do it. Michael turned back to the device, focusing entirely on the yellow wire. With precise movement, he cut it cleanly. The timer stopped at 12 seconds. Police cruisers screeched to a halt at the park's edge. Rodriguez and Taylor appeared from opposite directions, David Lancaster behind them with weapon drawn. Device disarmed, Michael called clearly. Suspect in custody. As officers swarmed Palmer, Michael remained by the diffused explosive, ensuring it posed no further threat. The familiar calm of post-operation assessment settled over him, cataloging details, preserving evidence, securing the scene. David approached once Palmer was secured in a cruiser. EOD team is 5 minutes out. They'll take over. Michael nodded, stepping back from the gazebo. Rodriguez and Taylor joined him, the three veterans unconsciously forming their standard triangular formation, watching each other's blind spots. Even here, even now, called it, Rodriguez said quietly. Too quiet. Desperate move, Taylor agreed. Last resort. Michael watched as Palmer sat in the police car, his expression vacant. The man had constructed an elaborate fiction about his military service, about Michael's involvement in classified leaks, about threats to neighborhood security. When that fiction collapsed, he'd resorted to creating an actual threat to validate his narrative. You okay? David asked, studying Michael with professional concern. Yes, Michael replied, and meant it. Despite the circumstances, the explosive device, the confrontation, the imminent danger, Michael had remained present. The training had engaged without triggering flashbacks. The past had informed his actions, without overwhelming his perception of the present. Progress, not perfection. Recovery in action. Neighbors gathered at the edges of the police perimeter, watching as the EOD team arrived to properly dispose of the device. Michael recognized the concern in their expressions, but also something new. Trust. Not fear of the unstable veteran, but confidence in the experienced one who had protected them. As dawn broke over Oak Ridge, Michael stood with his teammates, watching Palmer's carefully constructed campaign, and not with surveillance footage or association resolutions, but with federal charges and formal arrest. Not how I expected my leave to end, Rodriguez remarked. Never is, Taylor replied. The item Oak Ridge Police Station interview room was deliberately neutral. Beige walls, functional furniture, minimal distractions. Michael sat across from Palmer, David Lancaster standing unobtrusively in the corner, recording equipment activated. This confrontation had been Michael's request, a controlled environment to address the months of harassment directly. David had arranged it as part of Palmer's formal statement process, though prosecutors had warned it might complicate the case. You don't have to do this, Rodriguez had cautioned before Michael entered. The federal charges will stick without your involvement. I need to understand, Michael had replied simply. For my own recovery. Now, facing Palmer across the metal table, Michael studied the man who had systematically targeted him for months. Without his carefully maintained facade, Palmer looked smaller somehow, the confident posture replaced by defeated slumping, the authoritative expression now uncertain. Mr. Palmer, David began formally, you've waived your right to have counsel present for this conversation. Is that still your position? Palmer nodded. Yes. This discussion is being recorded and may be used in subsequent legal proceedings. Do you understand? I understand. Palmer's voice had lost its commanding tone. David nodded to Michael, stepping back to give them space while maintaining oversight. Why me? Michael asked, the question that had haunted him since Palmer's campaign began. Of all the veterans, all the neighbors you could have targeted, why focus so completely on me? Palmer stared at the table for a long moment before answering. You fit the profile. What profile? Force Recon. Honorable discharge after classified operation. PTSD symptoms. Palmer recited the criteria mechanically. Miltech said their intelligence pointed to someone matching that description, leaking details about Operation Amber Shield to journalists. So, you moved into my neighborhood specifically to monitor me? Palmer shook his head. I'd already been consulting for the HOA, security, upgrades, surveillance systems. When you moved in, it seemed convenient. An opportunity to gain additional standing with Miltech by confirming their suspicions, by harassing a combat veteran trying to recover from service-related trauma. Michael kept his voice neutral, but the question carried its own weight. It was an assignment. Palmer's justification sounded hollow even to himself. Corporate security sometimes requires aggressive intelligence gathering, and the false military credentials? The stolen valor? Palmer's expression tightened. That was before, unrelated, was it? The directness of the question left nowhere to hide. Palmer shifted uncomfortably. I tried to enlist. 3 times. Rejected for medical reasons. The admission seemed physically painful. In corporate security, military experience is valued, respected. After a while, implying service background became necessary for advancement. So, you built a false identity. Army Ranger, combat veteran. It started small, vague references, then more specific claims when no one questioned them. Palmer looked up briefly, then away. It became real to me, the respect it earned, the authority it granted. Michael understood better than Palmer realized. Identity was powerful, how others saw you, how you saw yourself. When Palmer encountered a real combat veteran with authentic experiences, that carefully constructed identity was threatened. And, when the neighborhood presentation succeeded, Michael continued, when your surveillance campaign failed, you escalated to an explosive device. Palmer flinched at the direct statement. I never intended. You placed an IED on my walking route, Michael interrupted, his voice still controlled but firmer now. Time to detonate when I would be passing. That demonstrates both intent and premeditation. I wanted to create an incident, Palmer admitted. Something that would validate my warnings about security threats. The device wasn't supposed to hurt anyone, just property damage. The EOD team's assessment indicates it contained enough explosive material to cause serious injury or death to anyone within the gazebo. Palmer's hands trembled slightly on the table. The online instructions were unclear. The admission was both pathetic and terrifying. A dangerous device constructed from inadequate understanding, placed in a residential neighborhood by a man desperate to validate his fictional narrative. Why continue after the federal warning? Michael asked. After learning I wasn't the leak Miltech was looking for? Palmer was silent for a long moment. By then, it wasn't about Miltech anymore. It was about, he struggled to articulate it. You made me irrelevant. The neighborhood stopped listening to me, started respecting you instead. The simple truth emerged. Palmer's campaign had evolved from professional assignment to personal vendetta. The man who had built his identity on stolen military authority couldn't tolerate being supplanted by authentic military experience. Your actions nearly killed innocent neighbors, Michael said. People you claim to be protecting. I know. For the first time, genuine remorse seemed to surface in Palmer's expression. When I saw you disarm it, when I realized what could have happened, Michael studied the man across from him. Not the manipulative antagonist who had dominated his life for months, but a desperate, insecure individual whose fabricated identity had collapsed, leaving nothing solid beneath. I need to know one more thing, Michael said. The classified mission details in those documents you circulated. Where did you get that information? Palmer hesitated, glancing toward David before answering. Miltech provided basic briefing materials. I embellished them, added details from news reports about helicopter incidents, created convincing redactions. So you never knew what actually happened that night? No, just that it involved a helicopter, civilian casualties, and significant losses for Miltech contractors. The relief Michael felt was immediate, but private. The night that haunted him, the impossible choice, the consequences he lived with daily, remained contained. Palmer had been attacking a shadow, not the substance of Michael's deepest wound. David stepped forward. I think that's enough for now. We have what we need for the formal statement. Michael stood, preparing to leave, but paused before turning away. The veterans group that meets at the community center on Thursdays. They work with people transitioning to civilian life. Learning to build identity beyond service. Palmer looked up, confusion evident in his expression. When you've served your time, Michael continued, consider attending. It might help with the transition to a more authentic life. The offer wasn't forgiveness. The harm Palmer had caused was too significant, too deliberate for that. But it was recognition of the human beneath the antagonist. The possibility of rehabilitation beyond punishment. Outside the interview room, Rodriguez and Taylor waited with Eleanor, the support team that had helped Michael navigate this conflict from beginning to end. Get what you needed? Rodriguez asked. Michael nodded. Enough to understand. To close that chapter. Federal prosecutors have added more charges, David informed them as he joined the group. The evidence from his home computer revealed detailed planning, multiple potential targets, timeline spanning months. He'll serve significant time, Taylor observed, and his corporate security career is permanently ended, David added. The court documents will be public record, including the stolen valor details. Eleanor watched Michael carefully. How do you feel about all this? The question was simple, but profound. Michael considered it genuinely. Relieved, he said finally. Not because he's being punished, but because the situation is resolved. The neighborhood is safe, the threat is contained, and your recovery can continue without his interference, Rodriguez added. Michael nodded. The confrontation had provided something essential. Not vengeance or vindication, but clarity. Understanding the forces that had shaped his Oak Ridge experience allowed him to process them properly, to integrate them into his recovery journey, rather than having them remain mysterious threats. As they left the police station, stepping into the warm afternoon light, Michael felt a subtle shift within himself. The hypervigilance that had become so automatic now easing further, the constant defensive posture softening into appropriate awareness. Palmer had tried to weaponize Michael's trauma against him. Instead, he had inadvertently created circumstances that accelerated Michael's healing, bringing teammates to his side, connecting him with neighbors, forcing him to articulate his experiences in ways that others could understand. Sometimes recovery came from unexpected sources. Sometimes healing emerged from the very conflicts that threatened to deepen wounds. As Michael walked toward Rodriguez's truck with his teammates, he realized he was looking forward to his next night walk, not as therapeutic necessity, but as peaceful choice. The weeks following Palmer's arrest brought significant changes to Oak Ridge. The Neighborhood Watch program transformed from surveillance operation to community support network. The association created a Veterans Affairs Committee with Eleanor as chairperson. The gazebo where Palmer had placed his device was renovated and rededicated as a peace garden, with plaques honoring local veterans. For Michael, the most profound changes were internal. The medication regimen stabilized, reducing side effects while maintaining benefits. The flashbacks diminished in both frequency and intensity. The nightmares, while still present, no longer dominated his sleep patterns. Rodriguez and Taylor had returned to their duties, Rodriguez to training at Fort Benning, Taylor to his deployment overseas, but they maintained regular contact through video calls and text messages. The team remained connected despite physical distance. Place looks different, Rodriguez observed during their weekly video chat, referring to Michael's living room visible in the background. Less command center? More actual home. Michael glanced around at the changes he'd implemented gradually over the past month. The tactical maps replaced by framed photographs. The security monitors reduced to a single discrete screen. The sparse furniture supplemented with comfortable additions. A reading chair, bookshelves, even a small houseplant Eleanor had insisted would bring life to the space. Still secure, Michael noted. Just less obvious about it. Integration. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Military precision with civilian comfort, best of both worlds. The term resonated with Michael. Integration. The goal Dr. Winters had identified from their first session, not eliminating his military experiences, but integrating them appropriately into his civilian identity. Finding balance between the skills that kept him alive in combat and the adaptations necessary for peaceful existence. Work going well? Rodriguez asked. Better than expected, Michael confirmed. The remote engineering projects keep me engaged without overwhelming social demands. The company's military contract experience means they understand accommodations for service-related conditions. And the neighbors? Different now. Mrs. Chen brings dinner once a week. Henderson's kid asks for help with his science projects. The Patels invite me to cultural celebrations. Michael still found the social integration challenging, but increasingly rewarding. Even have a standing coffee meeting with Eleanor every Sunday. Progress, brother. Rodriguez's grin was visible even through the somewhat pixelated connection. Real progress. After the call ended, Michael prepared for his evening walk. The ritual remained important to his recovery, but it had evolved. No longer a desperate attempt to outpace memories, but a mindful practice that helped process them. The neighborhood felt different under his feet. Homes that had once represented potential observation points now housed people he knew by name. Streets that had been tactical routes became familiar paths through a community that acknowledged him as a member rather than an intruder. As Michael rounded the corner near the Hendersons' house, he noticed their teenage son sitting on the front steps, head bowed over a textbook, expression frustrated. "Physics problems?" Michael asked, pausing at the sidewalk. The boy looked up, surprise giving way to recognition. "Yeah, makes no sense. I studied engineering before enlisting. Might be able to help." The offer was spontaneous, not planned or rehearsed as most of his social interactions had been in the past. The boy hesitated, then nodded, making space on the step. Michael sat beside him, examining the textbook problems with the same focused attention he'd once given to field manuals and mission briefings. For 30 minutes, they worked through equations together. Michael found himself translating complex concepts into practical applications, explaining velocity using baseball trajectories, demonstrating force calculations with examples from construction. Skills developed for military precision now repurposed for civilian education. "That actually makes sense now," the boy said when they finished. "Thanks, Mr. Reeves." "Michael," he corrected gently. "Mr. Reeves was my father." The small connection, unplanned, genuine, mutually beneficial, represented exactly the kind of community integration Dr. Winters had encouraged. As Michael continued his walk, he noted the interaction in his mental log as a positive milestone rather than a deviation from routine. When he reached the renovated gazebo, Michael paused to sit on one of the new benches. The structure had been transformed, the wooden posts reinforced with decorative stone, the roof replaced with a transparent material that allowed view of the stars, the surrounding area planted with flowers and herbs selected for their calming properties. The plaque at the entrance read, "Dedicated to those who served abroad and continue to serve at home through their presence in our community." Michael's phone chimed with a medication reminder. He took the prescribed dose without the resistance that had characterized earlier months, accepting the biochemical support as part of his overall recovery strategy rather than admission of weakness. He sat in the peaceful garden. Michael reflected on the transformation that had occurred in just a few months. Palmer's harassment campaign, intended to isolate and expel him, had instead catalyzed connection and integration. The presentation about PTSD, organized as defensive response to misconceptions, had educated an entire community about veterans' experiences. The confrontation in the police station, meant to provide closure to conflict, had opened new pathways for healing. Beautiful evening for stargazing. Eleanor's voice interrupted his reflection. She approached with her characteristic directness, carrying 2 travel mugs. "Thought I might find you here," she continued, offering one of the mugs. "Chamomile tea. Frank's evening ritual." Michael accepted the tea with a nod of thanks. Eleanor settled beside him on the bench, her presence comfortable rather than intrusive. "Association meeting was productive," she reported. "Veterans Affairs Committee has funding approval for the Resource Center. David's coordinating with the VA for staffing support." That was fast. "Community guilt is a powerful motivator," Eleanor observed wryly. "Everyone wants to demonstrate they weren't really fooled by Palmer, that they always supported veterans." Michael smiled slightly. "Whatever the motivation, the result is positive." "Indeed." Eleanor sipped her tea, studying the stars becoming visible above them. "Speaking of results, Dr. Winters mentioned you've been helping with her community outreach programs." The comment was casual but carried subtle weight. Acknowledgement of Michael's expanding involvement beyond his own recovery. "Just sharing experience," he said. "Helping translate medical terminology into practical understanding." "Precisely what's needed," Eleanor nodded. "The gap between clinical knowledge and lived experience. You bridge it effectively." The observation echoed what Dr. Winters had noted during their recent session. Michael's ability to communicate complex, neurological concepts through concrete examples drawn from military experience. The skill that had made him an effective team leader, now finding new application in civilian context. The Veterans Support Group asked if you'd consider facilitating some sessions, Eleanor continued, particularly for combat veterans struggling with reintegration. The request represented another step in Michael's evolving relationship with his military experience, not just managing his own symptoms, but potentially helping others navigate similar challenges. "I'm not a therapist," he pointed out. "No, but you're a survivor, a successful one, increasingly." Eleanor's direct gaze held both challenge and confidence. Sometimes that's more valuable than clinical expertise. Michael considered the proposition carefully. 6 months ago, the idea of leading group discussions would have been unthinkable. Too much social interaction, too many potential triggers, too great a responsibility. Now it felt challenging, but possible, perhaps even necessary. "I'll think about it," he said, which both knew meant yes, eventually. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled fully over the neighborhood. In homes around them, lights glowed in windows. Children were called in for dinner. Evening routines unfolded in the ordinary rhythm of civilian life. "Your night walks," Eleanor said after a while. "They're different now, aren't they?" Michael nodded. "Less escape, more integration. Processing rather than avoiding." Frank reached that point eventually. Took him longer without proper support. She patted his hand briefly. "You're making good time. All things considered, the validation from someone who understood the journey carried particular weight." Eleanor had witnessed her husband's decades-long struggle with post-Vietnam trauma. Her assessment of Michael's progress was informed by hard-earned wisdom. "I should finish my route," Michael said, rising from the bench. "Thank you for the tea, and thank you for the company." Eleanor remained seated, clearly planning to enjoy the peaceful garden a while longer. "Same time tomorrow for the committee planning session? I'll be there." As Michael completed his walking route, he noted the changes in his internal landscape. The hypervigilance had transformed from defensive scanning for threats to attentive awareness of his surroundings. The isolation had given way to selective, but meaningful social connections. The rigid routine had softened into structured flexibility. Not healed, precisely. Dr. Winters emphasized that recovery wasn't a destination, but an ongoing process, but healing, integrating, reconstructing himself not as purely military nor forcibly civilian, but as the complex intersection of both identities. When Michael reached his home, he paused to observe it from the sidewalk. The security cameras remained, but positioned more discreetly. The tactical lighting had been adjusted to balance security with aesthetic. The garden Rodriguez had planted as passive countermeasures now bloomed with both practical and ornamental species. A home gradually transforming from defensive position to living space, just as he was transitioning from surviving to living. The reconstruction continued, one day at a time, one connection at a time, one integration at a time. Recovery, Michael was learning, wasn't about forgetting the past or erasing its impacts. It was about building a present and future where those impacts didn't dictate every choice, every reaction, every possibility. He entered his home with the quiet satisfaction of progress made, distance traveled, battles survived but no longer defining the entirety of existence. 3 months later, the moving truck backed into Palmer's former driveway. Michael watched from his front porch, cup of coffee warming his hands against the autumn chill. The house had stood empty since Palmer's arrest and subsequent plea deal. 6 years for attempted use of an explosive device, with additional federal charges related to corporate espionage and fraud. The neighborhood had moved on, as neighborhoods do. Palmer's name rarely came up in conversations anymore, mentioned only as a cautionary tale about judgment and assumptions. The surveillance cameras he'd installed had been removed, the aggressive security lights replaced with tasteful landscaping illumination. Michael sipped his coffee, observing as a young couple directed movers carrying furniture into the house. A child about 8 years old explored the front yard, examining fallen leaves with scientific curiosity. A fresh start for the property that had once been the headquarters of Palmer's campaign against him. "New neighbors?" Eleanor asked, approaching. From her morning walk, her silver hair gleamed in the sunlight, her pace brisk despite her years. "Just arrived," Michael confirmed, making space for her on the porch step. "Young family. He's a software engineer. She's a pediatrician. Been doing. Your homework, I see. Michael smiled slightly. Association forwarded their welcome packet information. Part of my committee responsibilities, of course. Eleanor's knowing look acknowledged the balance Michael maintained. The security awareness of his military training now channeled into community involvement rather than isolation. Planning to introduce yourself? Once they're settled. Michael watched as the child discovered a particularly interesting leaf, calling excitedly for parental attention. Thought I might bring over that engineering reference set I mentioned for the father. And your banana bread, if you're still offering. Already cooling on my counter. Eleanor followed his gaze to the new family. They have no idea what this neighborhood has been through. No reason they should. Michael's voice held no bitterness, only pragmatic acceptance. Better they experience Oak Ridge as it is now, not as it was 6 months ago. The transformation had been remarkable by any standard. The Veterans Affairs Committee had established regular support programs at the community center. The Neighborhood Watch had evolved into a community assistance network, focusing on helping elderly residents and families needing support. The association had adopted new bylaws, specifically protecting medical accommodations and promoting inclusive policies. Michael's own evolution had been equally significant. The veterans' group sessions he'd initially approached with hesitation had become a cornerstone of his weekly routine, not just attending, but now co-facilitating with a VA counselor. The brain model he'd built for the community presentation had been replicated for use in schools and police training programs, with Michael occasionally presenting alongside Dr. Winters. The night walks continued, but their purpose had shifted. Sometimes therapeutic, sometimes simply contemplative, sometimes social when others joined for portions of the route. The rigid 47-minute circuit had flexed to accommodate conversation, weather, and Michael's fluctuating energy levels. Progress, as Dr. Winters often reminded him, wasn't measured by the absence of symptoms, but by the development of effective management strategies. The flashbacks still occurred occasionally. The nightmares hadn't disappeared completely. The hypervigilance could still activate under certain conditions. But these experiences no longer controlled Michael's existence, no longer dictated his choices or limited his possibilities. Veterans Day ceremony planning meeting tonight, Eleanor reminded him. The school principal requested you specifically for the student presentation portion. Michael nodded. Public speaking remained challenging but increasingly manageable. Each presentation, each shared experience, seemed to reclaim a piece of his military service from the shadow of that final mission, honoring the positive aspects of his time in uniform while acknowledging the costs. I'll be there, he confirmed. Rodriguez is sending some photos from his deployment for the memorial display. How is he doing? Good. Promotion came through last month. He's taking Taylor's team while Taylor attends officer training school. The ongoing connection with his former teammates provided essential continuity. Bridges between his military past and civilian present. Their regular video calls and occasional visits maintained the brotherhood that had once defined his daily existence. Across the street, the young family had paused in their moving activities. The father crouched beside the child, examining whatever treasure had been discovered in the yard. The mother joined them, all three heads bent together in shared fascination over something ordinary made extraordinary through a child's perspective. Michael recognized the moment for what it was, the beginning of their story in this place, untainted by its recent history. The neighborhood had healed enough to welcome newcomers, without burdening them with its wounds. His phone chimed with a calendar alert. The veterans group session he now co-facilitated would begin in 2 hours at the community center. Today's topic: translating military skills to civilian careers. Michael had prepared detailed notes connecting tactical planning abilities to project management, security awareness to risk assessment, team leadership to corporate management. I should prepare for the session, he said, rising from the porch. Eleanor nodded. I'll bring the banana bread by later for your new neighbors. As she departed, Michael noticed the young father looking his way uncertainly, clearly debating whether to approach. Michael raised his coffee mug in silent greeting, a small gesture of welcome. The man waved back, tension visibly easing in his posture. First contact established, non-threatening. Opening communication channels for future interaction. Michael smiled at his own thought patterns. Military terminology that once dominated his thinking, now coexisting with civilian application. Neither fully replacing the other but integrating into a functional hybrid. The precise observation skills that had made him an effective spotter now helped him notice a neighbor's uncertainty. The strategic assessment abilities that had guided combat decisions now informed community planning meetings. Inside his home, Michael reviewed his notes for the veterans group, adding examples and refinements based on his own ongoing experience. The session outline had evolved over weeks of feedback and adjustment, each iteration more effective at bridging military and civilian perspectives. On his desk sat a framed photograph Rodriguez had sent, the three of them together during training, years before the helicopter mission that had changed everything. Michael had hesitated before displaying it, concerned it might trigger memories better left contained. Instead, it had become a touchstone, a reminder of strengths developed and bonds formed, separate from the trauma of that final night. Beside it lay the most recent brain model he'd built, smaller than the original but more detailed, incorporating the latest neurological research on trauma recovery and neural plasticity. The red pathways representing hyperarousal were now balanced by expanded blue integration circuits and green emotional regulation networks, a visual representation of healing in progress, never complete, but steadily advancing. When Michael left, for the veterans group session, he paused on his front porch, surveying the neighborhood that had transformed from battlefield to community. The Henderson boy waved from his yard, where he was raking leaves. Mrs. Chen called a greeting from her garden. The Patel family's youngest daughter practiced bicycle riding under her father's watchful guidance. Ordinary moments in ordinary lives. The peaceful existence Michael had once thought permanently beyond his reach now unfolding around him, including him, sustaining him. He walked to his truck, movements fluid rather than hypervigilant. The weight he carried hadn't vanished, the memories, the responsibilities, the ongoing recovery work, but it had become manageable, integrated into his daily existence rather than dominating it. From across the street, the new family's child called out unexpectedly, "Are you a soldier? You look like one." The directness of children. Michael paused, considering his response carefully. "I was," he answered simply. "Marine Force Recon, not anymore. My grandpa was a soldier too." The child's expression brightened with recognition. "Mom says he gets sad sometimes about it." The mother appeared, looking embarrassed. "I'm so sorry. It's okay," Michael assured her. "He's right. Sometimes veterans do get sad about what we experienced, but we also learned important things that help us now." "Like what?" the child asked. Michael thought for a moment. "Like how to be brave even when you're scared. How to help your team when things get difficult. How to keep going when you want to stop." The mother's expression shifted from embarrassment to appreciation. "That's a beautiful way to explain it. Thank you." Michael nodded, sensing the connection forming, not just with this family, but with his own integrated identity, not defined solely by trauma nor attempting to erase his military past, but honoring both aspects of his experience, the costs and the values. As he drove to the community center, Michael reflected on the journey of the past months, from isolated veteran to community member, from hypervigilant survivor to recovering leader, from nocturnal walker fleeing memories to guide helping others navigate their own paths. Palmer had complained about his night walks, never understanding they were a form of healing rather than threat. The irony wasn't lost on Michael, that those walks, initially targeted as suspicious behavior, had ultimately connected him to the very community Palmer had tried to turn against him. The veterans waited at the community center, men and women, whose experiences echoed his own in different contexts, different conflicts, different eras. Their faces brightened with recognition as he entered, not as an outsider but as one of their own, someone who understood both the battlefield and the challenging terrain of returning home. "Ready to begin?" his co-facilitator asked. Michael surveyed the room, meeting each person's gaze with quiet acknowledgement of their shared journey. "Ready," he confirmed, and meant it in ways that extended far beyond the session ahead. The night walks continued, but they were no longer lonely.